Chapter 22. The burning turpentine heated up the air, and the sky lamp slowly rose into the sky. The fire gradually faded away, becoming smaller and smaller, and finally merged into the sky full of stars. The young girl put her palms together, her pretty face full of sincerity, and her heart full of good wishes, watching the sky lamp gradually drift away. After releasing the sky lamp to pray for blessings, there were more activities. The young girls laughed, the naughty children played, and the whole Willow Leaf village was in a lively atmosphere. Lee leaned on a big tree under the building, his eyes and thoughts drifting away along with the sky lamp. At this moment, he was incompatible with this festive atmosphere. As a stranger in a foreign land, he missed his family more during festive occasions. The loneliness and misery of living in a foreign land had never been so clear before. The more lively the surrounding atmosphere, the more the feelings hidden in the bottom of Li Yi's heart were revealed, until he could no longer suppress it. His mother's nagging often annoyed him, and his several crazy friends also made him feel that he was not careful in making friends. He often scolded the black-hearted boss behind his back, who didn't give him overtime pay for working overtime, and sometimes he would sigh about his messy life. But these were all the things he missed the most now. Li Yi, who was never very emotional, couldn't help but burst into tears at this moment. On top of the exquisite building, the woman stood there with her arms crossed, holding a long sword. She looked at the figure not far away, revealing a side of him that she had never seen before. A strange expression appeared on her face, one of surprise and astonishment. It was only now that she discovered that the impoverished scholar she thought she had seen through seemed to be covered with a mysterious veil. Son-in-law. A delicate figure ran over from afar. The young servant girl's pretty face was full of smiles, and her eyes curved into crescent moons. She lifted the hem of her clothes and said to Li Yi as if showing off, "Son-in-law, I stole some fruit from there." Suddenly, as if she found something, her clear voice became panicked. "Son-in-law, why are you crying?" Li Yi waved his sleeves and wiped the tears on his face without leaving a trace. He smiled and said, "It's nothing. Sand got into my eyes just now." "Son-in-law, take these fruits. Xiao Huan will help you blow them." Under the girl's careful blowing sound, one of the sky prayer lanterns that rose into the sky swayed a few times in the air because the resin was about to burn out, then slowly fell down in a certain direction. In the dark night, the starlight cast a huge shadow. A magnificent city appeared in the flickering lights. The tall city walls separated the inside and outside of the city into two different worlds. The outside of the city was lonely and cold, but the atmosphere inside the city was almost boiling. The peddlers and shouts were mixed with the deafening sounds of gongs and firecrackers. For the people living in this city, the nightlife had just begun. On the main roads of the city, there was an endless stream of carriages and horses, even before the sky turned dark. Outside the tall courtyard walls of some wealthy families, there was occasionally a corner of a colorful building. In the streets, alleys, brothels, and restaurants, all kinds of goods were displayed at the entrance, competing with each other in luxury. The ripples were clear and crystalline, reflecting the flickering lights on the surface of the river. There was an endless stream of pleasure boats and small boats. Singing and laughter lingered on the surface of the river, rising and falling again. And at this time, on a slowly moving two-story pleasure boat, a small poetry gathering had already reached its climax. "Brother Sue is so talented, I am ashamed." Tonight, Brother Sue's beautiful poem will probably take first place. Hee, it's just a coincidence. Naturally, I don't dare to say first place. I still need everyone's comments. Brother Sue is too humble. In terms of Chishi poems, no one here can compare to you. It seemed that a young scholar had made an excellent poem, attracting the admiration of the people around him. After a few excuses, Youth Su couldn't help but show a proud expression. Although tonight was only a small poetry gathering, the participants were only a few not famous poetry societies. Even if their works could take first place, it could only be circulated in a small circle. By tomorrow, it would probably be drowned in the vast sea of poems. But at the very least, at this moment, the youth surnamed Su enjoyed the praise of the people around him. If a female singer were to sing it later, his vanity would be greatly satisfied. Humph! Don't you think it's too early to say such nonsense before the poetry gathering is over? In the midst of all the praises, there was a sudden cold snort, which was particularly harsh. Everyone turned their heads angrily and saw a few figures walking towards them. It's the Bailu Poetry Society. Seeing those people, the crowd frowned slightly. Obviously, they didn't like them. It was not strange. Since ancient times, scholars despised each other. Since they belonged to different poetry societies, they usually didn't look up to each other. In the poetry gathering, they were even more competitive. In particular, the other party had spoken rudely just now. Naturally, they wouldn't be nice to them. "Oh, what advice do you have, Brother Fong?" Youth Su raised his eyebrows and asked. "I can't say that I want to give advice, but I happened to get a Qishi poem by chance. How about asking the literary friends of the Dongli Poetry Club to correct it?" A young man in a cyan gown at the front said lightly. "I'm all ears." The youth Fong didn't stand on ceremony. There was a brush and ink on the table beside him. He simply picked up the brush and, after a moment of contemplation, started to write on the white paper. Everyone's eyes fell on the table at the same time. When the youth Fong wrote halfway, the group of people led by the youth Su slightly changed their expressions, and their expressions became somewhat unnatural. The style is sad and melancholy. Through the Altair and the Weaving Girl, it reflects the joys and sorrows of the human world. What a good poem. I'm afraid Su Wentian is still inferior to Fang Zhou. Those who could participate in the poetry gathering more or less had some cultural background. At this moment, the crowd looked at the poem written by the youth Fang. Compared with Su Wentian's poem, the former's poem was superior in both the choice of words and the idea. It was generally like this in the poetry gathering. Even if it was a rare good poem, it was common for others to beat it. It was not uncommon for a nameless poet to become famous and gain both fame and fortune with a good poem. This was the charm of poetry. After being defeated by his opponent with one poem, the youth Su led the people of Dongli Poetry Society to another place dejectedly. The victorious White Dew Poetry Society began to enjoy the praises of the crowd. At this moment, no one noticed that a female singer who had just finished singing walked out of the cabin and came to the deck. The female singer raised her head and looked up with a slight smile on her face. She went up the stairs to the top and walked to the side of the carved railing. She smiled at the woman who was leaning against the railing and looking at the river. "Why did you come up alone? Just now several people had good poems. Do you want to go down and have a look?" The woman turned her head slightly and revealed a beautiful face. She smiled and said, "It's okay if you don't. Although the choice of words is different, most of them are like pleasure is short. They are sad and sorrowful, and nothing new. My ears are about to get calluses from hearing them." The female singer laughed bitterly and said, "I wonder how the scholars downstairs would feel if they knew that Miss One described them like this?" The beautiful woman on the side was about to speak when she suddenly raised her head and looked up. The female singer also felt something and looked up. Suddenly, she saw a tiny flash of fire, and then a white shadow fell from the sky and landed at their feet. Chapter 23. This is. The absolute beauty was startled to see a strange object falling from the sky all of a sudden. When she saw the object at her feet clearly, a look of realization flashed across her pretty face. She bent down to pick up the object and said, "This is probably a sky prayer lamp that has burned out of oil and fell down, right?" According to the tradition of the Jing Kingdom, there would be people releasing sky prayer lanterns to pray for blessings on every festival, especially on the Double Seventh Festival and the Lantern Festival. Rosin or oil-stained cloth would eventually burn out, so it was not strange to pick up a sky prayer lantern on the night of the Double Seventh Festival. "There are words on it, look at what's written." After being stunned for a moment, The female singer glanced at the sky prayer lantern in the lady's hand. An interested smile surfaced on her face as she spoke with a smile. The young girls of the Jing Kingdom would usually write their wishes on the sky lamp when they released it on the Double Seventh Festival. Most of them prayed that the Weaver Maiden would bestow them with a Rui husband or bless them with feelings and peace. Everyone had a heart for gossip, let alone women. Even if they did not know a woman's secret, they would still be very interested. I'm afraid this is not what a gentleman would do. The Absolute Beauty looked hesitant. We are young girls, we are not gentlemen. The female singer chuckled and took the sky lamp from the girl's hand. When she looked over, the first thing she saw was a painting. Actually, at first glance, the female singer was not sure if it was a painting. It was just a simple outline of lines without any color. It was different from any painting that she knew of, but it was these simple lines that outlined the beautiful scene of a magpie meeting on the bridge. The female singer was stunned for a moment, as she had never seen such a strange painting. This painting, when the peerless beauty moved closer, a look of amazement appeared on her face. She muttered, "What a great magpie bridge meeting. I've never seen this kind of painting before. Although it's a little too simple, looking at it, it's quite interesting." The female singer's gaze lingered on the painting for a moment. Then she said, "There are words here." However, when she saw the words beside the painting, she could not help but laugh. It's baring its fangs and brandishing its claws without any rhyme or reason. I'm afraid it was written by an ignorant child. Then he sighed and said, "It's a pity for this painting." Just as he was about to throw the sky prayer lantern away, the beautiful woman beside him suddenly said, "Wait a moment." She reached out to take the sky prayer lantern and carefully read the words on it. Immortal Magpie Bridge. When the Absolute Beauty recited these 3 words, the female singer's expression changed, and she blurted out, "It's the Chishi poem." As a songstress, most of the songs she sang were famous poems. This time, she was invited to participate in the Chishi poetry meet. When there was a good poem, she would sing it. She couldn't be more familiar with the names of these words. The beautiful woman nodded and ignored the crooked handwriting. She continued to read aloud. Delicate clouds play tricks. The flying stars spread hatred. The silver river passes in the dark. The courtesan nodded her head, and a look of praise appeared on her face. It's actually a new poem, and the use of words is exquisite. I'm afraid that the scholars downstairs wouldn't be able to come up with the first line. However, although the choice of words is exquisite, the intention is not enough. Flying stars spread hatred. Still can't escape the pattern of the Chishi poetry meet. To these songstress, they might not be able to come up with a good poem, but they had sung poems for many years. When it came to judging poems, they could be considered experts. Her evaluation of the first line was rather pertinent. However, at this moment, the songstress didn't see that when the lady next to her looked down again, her face gradually brightened. Delicate clouds play tricks. The flying stars spread hatred. The silver river passes in the dark. When the golden wind and jade do meet, it surpasses countless in this world. After reciting the poem, before the songstress could speak, the Absolute Beauty couldn't help but comment. A sudden turn of the peak, turning hatred into pity. What a good when the golden wind and jade do meet. It surpasses countless in this world. Just this one line is better than thousands of lines by others. Actually, when the words reached this point, the idea and outline had already emerged. This poem was obviously different from the mournful style of the Chishi poems in the past. It was written in a different way. While it was graceful and subtle, it also left an endless aftertaste. The Chishi poetry meet had always been the theme of scholars. Since ancient times, it was unknown how many lines had been left behind. Although the choice of words was different, most of them followed the traditional theme of joy is short, and the style was sad and mournful. In contrast, this poem took a sudden turn of the peak, and was different from the usual. There was no resentment or hatred. Just from the idea alone, it was a level higher. Where's the lower palace? Quickly recite it. At this moment, the songstress was completely attracted by this poem, and couldn't help but urge. Even without the songstress's urging, the Absolute Beauty's gaze had already turned to the lower palace. This time, the songstress waited for a long time, but there was no sound. When she turned her head to look, she realized that the absolute beauty's face had already undergone some obvious changes. She revealed a formal expression and muttered a few words. Her expression gradually changed from formal to stern. Tender feelings like water. A good night is like a dream. Enduring the road of Magpie Bridge home. The songstress couldn't recognize it, and she peeked over and read it softly. If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, how would they? When she read the last sentence, her voice gradually became softer, and finally, there was no more sound. On the pleasure boat, the two girls looked at the words on the sky lamp, and for a moment they were dazed. Which girl didn't yearn for love? Which girl didn't fantasize about a period of sentimental love, finding a lover, helping each other in difficult times, and spending the rest of their lives together? But when the words, if the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, how would they be together day and night appeared? It caused the girls' concept of love to waver. Love had to withstand the test of a long separation. As long as they could love each other sincerely, even if they were apart for a long time, it was much more precious than the vulgar pleasure of being together day and night. This was a difference in realm, and it far surpassed all the chishi poetry they had seen before. The absolute beauty's red lips moved slightly, and she couldn't help but sing the immortal Magpie Bridge. This was a poem that she was extremely familiar with. The song was light and spirited, as if it came from the clouds, and floated on the surface of the river far away. Slightly behind the two of them, two green-robed scholars stood at the staircase. When they heard the song, an extremely shocked expression appeared on their faces. "I really didn't expect Lady Ruoqing to be so talented," one of them murmured. "What a good immortal Magpie Bridge. Whether it is the choice of words or the concept, they are all superb. We are ashamed that we can't compare." The person beside him had a look of shame on his face, and he tore the piece of paper in his hand that had his poem written on it into pieces. He was the publicly acknowledged winner of the Chishi Poetry Meet tonight, and he had wanted to bring his work up to be evaluated. After hearing the immortal Magpie Bridge, he no longer had that kind of thought. If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, how would they be together day and night? I'm afraid that just this sentence alone is enough to be passed down through the ages. After an unknown amount of time, the absolute beauty sighed. Her pretty face still had an expression of endless recollection, and it was obvious that her mood had been affected by this poem. At the same time, the two scholars also quietly came down the stairs and walked into the cabin from outside. In a split second, several people surrounded them. Chapter 24. It was hard to leave one's homeland. On the night of the Double Seventh Festival, while others were busy dating girls, Li Yi couldn't control his emotions and tears streamed down his face because he missed his homeland. After missing his homeland enough, he still had to continue living. He didn't want to think about what the future would be like for the time being. What Li Yi should think about now was how to lead his family to prosperity. He said that the pain in the wind and rain is nothing. Wipe your tears and don't be afraid. At least we still have dreams. The servant girl was worried about her son-in-law and secretly hid outside the window to eavesdrop. When the strange singing in the room gradually disappeared, the servant girl looked up and felt slightly relieved. She also prepared to go back to her room to sleep. The sky was full of stars. As it was midnight, the lively atmosphere in the Willow Leaf village gradually died down. A little further away, the sword-wielding girl leaned against a willow tree that was as thick as a few people. She sensed the steady breathing in the room not far away from her. She slowly exhaled a mouthful of murky air and disappeared into the darkness. At this time, Li Yi, who had already reunited with his homeland in his sweet dream, didn't know that because of his unintentional action, an invisible wave was gradually rising somewhere far away, back to the pleasure boat. When two young scholars walked into the cabin, they were still in a trance as if they had suffered a great blow in their lives. At this time, there were already people surrounding them. "Brother Fong, how is it? How did Lady Ruoqing evaluate it?" Tonight's Double Seventh Festival poem was first place. Brother Fong must have been in the limelight in front of Lady Ruoqing this time, right? Of course. Brother Fong's poem, even in a large poetry gathering like Bishuan and Zhaowen, can be considered a masterpiece. Just now, after a round of competition, the scholar named Fang Zhou used an excellent Qixi poem to beat everyone else and took first place in the poetry meet. Everyone praised him generously. That poem was indeed a masterpiece. Even if it was placed in one of the most popular poetry gatherings tonight, it wouldn't be buried. Tomorrow, when someone sorted out the most outstanding poems of tonight's poetry gatherings and compiled it into a book, Fang Zhou's poem might also be on the list. At that time, he would probably become famous. Just now, he had taken it out for Miss Ruoqing to appraise. Now that he had returned, everyone came forward to ask him about it. If he had heard everyone's praises just now, the scholar named Fang Zhou would definitely have enjoyed it immensely. However, at this moment, he only felt an indescribable irony. He smiled bitterly and said, "Regarding the matter of first place, everyone, please do not mention it again. My words are really not worthy of these 2 words. Sai, Brother Fang is too humble. Indeed, when it comes to Qixi poetry, no one here can compare to Brother Fang." When the crowd heard this, they all laughed and spoke, thinking that he was just being humble. Fang Zhou only shook his head and smiled bitterly. His expression was extremely awkward. After a while, the crowd also noticed that he was acting strangely, and the atmosphere finally began to change. Could it be that Brother Fang has seen an even better poem? Scholar Fang smiled bitterly and nodded. He took a few steps forward and walked to a table. He slowly said, "Just now, I heard Lady Ruoqing recite another Qixi poem outside. Everyone, please take a look." With a wave of the brush, 3 large words appeared on the white paper. Immortals at the Magpie Bridge. As each and every word was written out from Scholar Fang's hand, the noise in the hall gradually disappeared. Only the sound of the scholar's breathing gradually became heavier. When the last line of the poem was finished, the surroundings were so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. After a while, a huge uproar drowned the entire room. Li, the singer and the beautiful woman muttered this name as they walked down the stairs. Suddenly, she turned her head and asked, "Does Ruoqing know this scholar?" The beautiful woman had also been thinking about this question. She shook her head and said, "I've never heard of him before. But for the sky prayer lantern to be picked up by you and me, he must be a scholar nearby. But this name is really unfamiliar. With the standard of a normal scholar, I'm afraid they would never be able to write such a good poem in their lifetime. Could it be one of those few?" A look of suspicion appeared on the singer's face. She then said a few names. These people were all famous scholars in Qing'an Prefecture. Their accomplishments in poetry were very deep, and many of their poems were widely read. Putting aside the fact that the name is different, just this handwriting. The lady named Ruoqing shook her head. After hesitating for a moment, she finally said, "Just this handwriting alone is not something that an ordinary scholar could write." There was another sentence that she didn't say. With her accomplishments in poetry, she could naturally see that even the people that the singer had just mentioned were far from being able to write such a poem. After a while, the 2 of them had reached the door of the hall. The singer pushed the door open, and the 2 of them stepped in. Suddenly, they felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. When they looked up, they found that the hall was frighteningly quiet. The scene of loud chatter was no longer there. Everyone was looking at them with a strange expression. The 2 women's hearts shook. They didn't know what had happened. At this moment, the scholar surnamed Fang stepped forward and smiled bitterly at the beautiful woman. He raised his hands in a fist salute and said, "Miss Ruoqing is very talented. Now that this immortal of the Magpie Bridge has appeared, I'm afraid we don't need to write Qixi poems in the future. I didn't think that Miss Ruoqing was such a talented woman. My apologies. If you have such talent, why hide it earlier? Such talent really makes us men feel guilty." Although in this day and age, the status of women was not very high, but for those who were not any less talented than them, they could still receive the respect of these scholars. At this time, the beautiful woman had more or less understood why they would act like this. She hurriedly said, "Everyone may be mistaken. This immortal of the Magpie Bridge is not." "Ah, Miss Ruoqing, there is no need to be so modest. Brother Fang and Brother Wu heard it just now." "Yes, I'm afraid we won't be able to write such a poem in our lifetime. There is no need to refuse. Seeing that everyone didn't seem to believe her explanation, a bitter smile appeared on the woman's face. She raised her hand and pressed it down. When her voice died down, she opened her mouth and said, "If I said that this poem fell from the sky and I happened to pick it up, would you believe me?" The surrounding atmosphere was silent for a moment, and then someone laughed out loud. "Hee hee, miss, you must be joking." Everyone looked at the beautiful woman strangely. Their faces revealed an expression that said, "Don't take us for fools." If this kind of poem could casually fall from the sky, then what was the point of having scholars like them? They might as well go home and farm, and compose some useless poem. Seeing this, the absolute beauty could only smile bitterly, and take out the sky prayer lantern that she had picked up earlier. Not long after, between the two pleasure boats on the river, a paper raft was sent over. After it was picked up by someone, it spread like snowflakes. This was the usual practice in the past. During such a large-scale festival, if a poetry competition produced a good poem, it would be taken out to exchange and correct with others. The poem would be passed around in mini poetry competitions. When dawn came, someone would extract 10 of the most popular poems and compile them into a book, naming it Chishi Poetry Collection, or something like that. For a long time to come, these poems would become the signature songs of the brothels, and they would soon spread far and wide. Tonight, a poem on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month called Immortal of the Magpie Bridge spread through the two shores of the Yuan River in this manner, causing quite a commotion. At this time, in the Willow Leaf Village, the scholar named Li suddenly felt a chill in his sleep. He unconsciously frowned and wrapped his blanket tightly around himself. He turned over and continued to sleep. Chapter 25. When Li woke up, the sky was already bright. He estimated the time, and found that it was almost 10 o'clock in the future. In the past, Xiao Huan would wake him up early. After washing up, it was time to go to school to teach the naughty children. Today was the first day after Chinese Valentine's Day. By right, Li Yi should be telling the naughty children about the battle between the Monkey King and the Yellow Wind Monster. But according to the time he woke up today, if he went to school now, the class would be over by the time he got there. After getting dressed, he just got out of bed and saw Xiao Huan coming in with a basin of water. She looked up and saw Li Yi saying, "Young master, you're awake. Why didn't you wake me up this morning?" After sleeping for a long time, Li Yi still felt a little dizzy when he got up. He rubbed his swollen head and asked, "I saw that you were sleeping soundly this morning, so I didn't wake you up." Xiao Huan put the copper basin on the shelf and said, "Young master, wash up first. I just went to the school and told the children to come to class tomorrow." In fact, Li didn't have the mood to teach the naughty children today. He casually washed his face with the water in the copper basin and symbolically wiped his face with a dry cloth. In this era, there was something called soap, which was equivalent to the soap of the future. But it was used by high officials and nobles to wash their faces or bathe. Ordinary people couldn't afford it at all. Li Yi had long been thinking about how to make soap. As an Aquarius with a little obsessive-compulsive disorder, it was hard to bear not being able to wash his face clean every day. After washing his face, he dipped a willow branch in a little salt and brushed his teeth simply. Salt was still very expensive in this world. Almost no poor people would use salt to brush their teeth. But he did not want to learn from Xiao Huan, chewing on willow branches to clean his teeth. That thing tasted too bitter. It was not that bad. When he walked out of the door, he happened to see Lu Rui coming back from outside. Her forehead was slightly sweaty. She should have just come back from practicing. She just glanced at Li Yi and didn't say anything. Then she went back to her room to take a bath. Li Yi's room was in the front yard, while the backyard was Xiao Huan and Lu's sister Rui's room, which he had never entered. Looking at Rui's disappearing figure, Li Yi's lips twitched. She was pretty and thick-skinned. She had cheated him of a few hundred copper coins. Yet she still pretended that nothing had happened. At the very least, Li Yi could not do this. "Hey, Xiao Huan is here." A rough voice suddenly came from the side, startling Li Yi. When he turned his head, he saw a burly middle-aged man walking into the courtyard. When he saw this man, Li Yi's body trembled and his face immediately darkened. The burly man and him could be considered old acquaintances. At that time, when Lu Rui gave the order, it was this man who flipped off the horse and threw himself onto it. Suddenly seeing this familiar face, Li Yi felt a faint pain in his lower abdomen. "Uncle Fong, what can I do for you?" Xiao Huan was very friendly to this man and said with a smile. The man smiled honestly and waved the things in his hands. He said, "I just hunted a pheasant from the mountain this morning. Take it and stew it for Miss to nourish her body." Only then did Li Yi realize that the man was carrying two unknown objects in his hands. A golden crown, colorful feathers, a red belly, and long tail feathers. A red-bellied golden pheasant. Li Yi glanced at the man. This was the pheasant he hunted on the mountain? Hunting and killing animals protected by the country was illegal in the future. However, a golden pheasant was still a chicken. It was fine as long as there was meat. Moreover, wild pheasants should be much more delicious than the hens raised by the Wu family, right? In an instant, when Li Yi looked at the man again, he actually felt that the originally hateful face was much more pleasing to the eye. Xiao Huan looked troubled and said, "Uncle Fong, take these two pheasants back and let Auntie stew them for the children. We haven't finished eating the pheasants that the son-in-law picked up 2 days ago. Last year's harvest was not good, and every family in the village had a hard time. The Lu family was better off. After all, they were the main family, and at least they would not starve. However, there were many people who even had to carefully plan their 2 meals a day. The man in front of him belonged to this category. He probably did not eat meat twice a year. If he accepted this pheasant, not only would the miss blame him, but Xiao Huan herself would also not be able to help him. I don't dare to refuse an elder's gift. Xiao Huan, you can't be so rude." Li Yi strode over and took the pheasants from the man with a smile on his face. "Well, Uncle Fong, right? Thank you." The man was stunned for a moment. Then he said with a silly smile, "I'm a rough man. I don't know anything about refusing. My family said that if it wasn't for the old master, who gave us a mouthful of food, we would have starved to death. We can't be heartless. We don't have much at home, so you can take these 2 pheasants." The smile on Li Yi's face became even brighter. The people of ancient times were really simple and adorable. Son-in-law. The little servant girl tugged at the corner of Li Yi's clothes. She opened her mouth, but in the end, she did not say anything. The man turned his head and looked at Li Yi. Seeing his thin and weak body, he gave a silly smile and reached out to pat him on the shoulder. He said, "Son-in-law's body is so thin, you should eat well." A strong force suddenly came from his shoulder. Li Yi's body staggered, and he almost knelt on the ground. Seeing this, the man was stunned again. Then he scratched his head in embarrassment. "I'm really sorry. My hands are strong and I forgot that you are a scholar. Your body is weak, please don't blame me." Li Yi's face twitched a little. He wondered if this guy's honesty was fake. "Well, if there's nothing else, I'll go back first. My family is still waiting for me at home." The man rubbed his hands and said with some embarrassment, "Goodbye, Uncle Fong." Watching the man's figure disappear from afar, Xiao Huan sighed and said, "Son-in-law, you shouldn't have accepted these 2 pheasants just now." As Li Yi rubbed his still aching shoulder, he asked in confusion, "Why?" Previously, Master Fong's family was indebted to Uncle Fong's family. Now there are only 2 young ladies left at home. Uncle Fong often sends some things over, and some of Master's old brothers from back, then also help out with anything. The little servant girl's pretty eyebrows furrowed. She said, "Usually, the young lady doesn't let Xiao Huan accept these things. Their lives are not good." If the pheasants in his hands were the 2 hens from Lady Wu's house, Li Yi would definitely kill them and pluck their feathers without any psychological burden. One would make fried chicken steak, and the other would make chicken soup. But hearing Xiao Huan say this, he suddenly felt that the pheasants in his hands were much heavier. It was not good to accept kindness for no reason. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "How about this? We cook these 2 pheasants and send some to them as a return gift. What do you think?" Hearing this, the little servant girl's eyes suddenly lit up. She said, Okay, the food you cook is so delicious they will definitely like it." Li Yi smiled. After putting the pheasants down, he waved his hand and said, "Clean up and go to the mountain to pick some fresh mushrooms. We will eat chicken stewed with mushrooms today." Chapter 26. A little girl picking mushrooms, carrying a large bamboo basket. Walking through the forest and hills barefooted in the early morning. The young girl's clear voice accompanied by a cheerful melody echoed on the mountain path. The young servant girl sang the song that the son-in-law had just taught her, and bounced along the way. The small bamboo basket on her back was already filled with mini mushrooms. The son-in-law was going to cook a dish that she had never eaten before in the afternoon. The young girl's heart was filled with a little anticipation, and even her footsteps became much lighter. Li walked a few steps behind the young servant girl. Looking at this beautiful figure that seemed to be filled with limitless vitality, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It's good to be young. The mushrooms that grew in the mountains were naturally harmless and fresh. Whether it was chicken stew with mushrooms, or a bowl of delicious mushroom soup, they were the best choice of ingredients. "Son-in-law, come look, this mushroom is so beautiful." The young servant girl's startled voice once again rang in Li Yi's ear. When he turned his head to look, he found that Xiao Huan was excitedly running to a certain tree and plucking an orange-red mushroom that was covered with white scales. "This mushroom is so beautiful, it must be very delicious." The young servant girl walked in front of Li Yi, as if she was asking for praise, and said while holding the mushroom. Li Yi carefully looked at the mushroom in Xiao Huan's hand, and quickly found a similar picture in an atlas of fungi in his mind. He then smiled and shook his head, saying, "This mushroom can't be eaten. If you eat it, you will have a stomachache." "Why?" The young girl didn't understand. Why would eating such a beautiful mushroom cause diarrhea? "This is a fly-catching fungus, also known as a poisonous fly fungus. It is a type of poisonous mushroom." Li Yi once again acted as an encyclopedia for the young servant girl. "If you eat this mushroom, you will have a headache, stomachache, pain everywhere. In any case, this mushroom can't be eaten." The young servant girl looked at Li Yi, and her big eyes began to twinkle like little stars. To be able to cook, draw, write poems, sing, and even be able to tell if a mushroom is poisonous at a glance. The son-in-law is amazing. In the future, you must remember that the prettier a mushroom is, the more likely it is to be a poisonous mushroom. Just like women, the prettier they are, the more dangerous they are. Seeing that most of the mushrooms had been picked, and they were about to go home, Li Yi lectured the little servant girl on the philosophy of life. This little girl's mind was as pure as a piece of white paper. If she was sold, she would probably have to count the money for the other party. Usually, she had to set up a correct view of the world, so that she would not be taken advantage of in the future. Such a beautiful mushroom, how could it be poisonous? The young maidservant looked at the mushroom in her hand, and thought of what Li Yi had said just now. She hurriedly threw the mushroom away and said to herself, "The more beautiful they are, the more dangerous they are. It's not like that. Eldest miss and second miss are both so beautiful." As she said that, the young maidservant's pretty face blushed and she muttered softly, "Actually, Xiao Huan is also quite beautiful." She looked up and realized that Li Yi had already walked more than 10 steps away. She immediately stopped thinking about these things, and hurriedly chased after him. "Son-in-law, wait for me." When Li Yi and Xiao Huan returned to the stockade village, along the way, there were many people who greeted Xiao Huan. Li Yi memorized each and every one of these people's faces in his heart. Generally speaking, those who were friendly to Xiao Huan were all on Lu's sister Rui's side. When they passed by one of the houses, they saw a brat about 7 or 8 years old, who was wearing coarse clothes and had patches all over his body, squatting at the door and eating. When he heard someone coming, he looked up and timidly called out, "Sister Xiao Huan." This mischievous child Li Yi looked very unfamiliar. He definitely hadn't been to school, so Li Yi guessed that he shouldn't be a member of the Lu family. Most of the people in the Willow Leaf village had 2 meals a day, and the time was not fixed. When they passed by, Li Yi glanced at the mischievous child's bowl. It was black and he didn't know what it was. When he got closer, there was also a kind of unpleasant smell. It was hard to imagine that this was actually something that people ate. However, for the mischievous child, this seemed to be a delicacy. He ate it happily. In his other hand, there was also an object that looked like a steamed bun. It was also black, and when he bit into it, there was a crunching sound. Looking at the mischievous child with great difficulty, the muscles at the corner of Li Yi's mouth were a little impulsive, and he faintly felt a toothache. A strong figure walked out of the house. After seeing Li Yi and Xiao Huan, he was stunned for a moment. He immediately smiled honestly and greeted the two of them. Li Yi was also stunned. Wasn't this big man the one who gave them 2 pheasants in the morning? Looking down at the thing in the mischievous child's bowl again, Li Yi couldn't believe it. The big man who gave them meat so readily in the morning actually had his own child eating this kind of thing? The big man walked out of the house and gently kicked the mischievous child, sitting on the ground. He scolded, "Little bastard, what are you waiting for? This is the son-in-law, hurry up and call someone." "Greetings, son-in-law." After being kicked by his father, the mischievous child put down the bowl and cornbread and timidly barked. Woof! A yellow dog ran out of the house. Perhaps it felt that the young man in front of it was very unfamiliar, so it barked at Li Yi twice. Suddenly, it fiercely sniffed its nose. When it glanced at the cornbread on the side, its eyes suddenly lit up. It bit the cornbread and disappeared in front of them at a shocking speed. Seeing this scene, the mischievous child was stunned, Xiao Huan was stunned, and Li Yi was stunned. The big man was also stunned. However, in the next moment, Li Yi suddenly heard an explosive roar in his ear. The big man's bear-like body had already chased after the dog. "Hey! If you dare eat that cornbread, I'll kill you today to go with my wine." Seeing the figure of the man and dog disappear, Li Yi looked down at the bowl of black food on the ground that emitted a strange smell. He already didn't have the mind to wonder why the yellow dog had such a domineering name as Hey. That big man gave them 2 pheasants, but his own family ate this kind of thing. This made Li Yi shocked, and he couldn't help but sink into deep thought. In the Willow Leaf village, the Liu family was like the landlord. They owned all the land, and although their lives weren't good, it wasn't too bad. However, most of the people were like the big man just now. They were almost equivalent to tenant farmers living at the lowest level of society. They were only able to feed their families and not starve to death. If they encountered a bad harvest year, they probably wouldn't even be able to fulfill this minimum requirement. Li Yi found out from Xiao Huan that last year was a disaster year with a large decrease in harvest. So everyone in the stronghold was currently living a very difficult life. In all fairness, if it was Li Yi himself, he definitely wouldn't do what the big man did under such circumstances. Perhaps this was the most admirable aspect of the people in this world. Li Yi couldn't help but admit that he was moved by the simple and honest big man in front of him, or in other words, the simple customs of this world. Chapter 27. When he was cooking in the afternoon, the sesame oil that he had pocketed during the Qiao festival finally came in handy. In this era where there was only steaming and boiling, being able to eat authentic stir-fried dishes was the happiest thing that Li Yi could feel at this stage. He used lettuce leaves to make a plate of stir-fried green vegetables. After the water celery from the river was blanched in the pot, it had a special flavor when mixed with cold water. The pheasant that the burly man brought over was made into chicken mushroom stew by Li Yi. They were all fresh ingredients, plus a simplified version of kung pao chicken, and a delicious mushroom soup. 2 meat dishes, 2 vegetables, and 1 soup. In the future, it might seem a little shabby, but now, it made Li Yi feel like he was celebrating the new year. For many people living in the Willow Leaf village, they might not even be able to eat so much during the new year. Xiao Huan. When the last mushroom soup was out of the pot, Li Yi tasted it. It tasted pretty good, so he shouted towards the door. The little servant girl ran in like the wind and hurriedly said, "Young master, what's the matter? Take some of these dishes and send them to Uncle Fong's house. We'll start eating when you come back." Li Yi took off his apron and said to Xiao Huan while washing his hands, "I'll go right away." Xiao Huan was already craving for food just by smelling the fragrance of the dishes. She quickly found a food container from the kitchen, washed it, and divided a portion of each dish. At this moment in a dilapidated courtyard, a dirty child looked at the burly man named Fong and said weakly, "Father, I'm hungry." A woman in coarse clothes touched her child's head lovingly, and a trace of helplessness flashed in her eyes. The burly man glared at a dog that was limping in the courtyard. In the end, he did not manage to snatch back the last cornbread. When he turned his head, a trace of bitterness appeared on his face, and he said, "Bear with it a little longer. When I get my salary tomorrow, I'll come back and buy you some steamed buns." Hearing the word steamed buns, a trace of color suddenly appeared in the child's eyes. He nodded his head and said, "Father, I'm not hungry anymore. I'll go out and play." Looking at the back of the child who seemed to be full of energy, the big man shook his head helplessly. For them, as long as the harvest of 1 year was bad, the following year would be a torment. At the same time, the naughty brat, who had just opened the door and was about to run out, saw a figure at the door. He suddenly stopped in his tracks and stood there, calling out in a low voice, "Sister Xiaohuan." The big man turned his head and saw Xiaohuan standing at the door. He hurried over and asked, "Xiaohuan, why are you here? Is there something on Mrs. side?" "That's not it." Xiaohuan smiled and handed over the food box in her hand, saying, "Son-in-law asked me to send this over." "What is this?" The burly man was a little puzzled as he opened the lid of the food box. In an instant, a rich aroma wafted out. When the naughty brat smelled it, he took a deep breath. A trace of saliva flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his stomach began to growl again. The big man was stunned for a moment and immediately said, "No, no, Xiaohuan, quickly take these back." For those living at the bottom of society, food was always the most important. This was because only by surviving would they have the right to talk about other things. The food that the burly man usually ate at home was just a few grains of rice mixed in with some wild vegetables, and that was enough to last them through the winter. However, there were vegetables and meat in the food box. Just the aroma alone was enough to make him drool. To the burly man, this was already an extremely valuable item. Xiaohuan did not take the food box. She smiled and said, "Uncle Fong, just take it. We can't finish it anyway. Son-in-law is still waiting for me to come home for dinner. Goodbye, Uncle Fong." "Xiaohuan, Xiaohuan," the burly man called out a few times. Seeing Xiaohuan's figure gradually disappear into the distance, he could only smile helplessly. When he turned his head, he saw his child standing there, staring straight at the food box in his hand and swallowing his saliva. Gulp. As if he could no longer resist the temptation of the delicacies, the burly man also swallowed his saliva. The brat beside him wanted to laugh, but did not dare. His face turned red. "Little brat." The big man lightly kicked the naughty brat's butt and cursed. He handed the box of food to the woman behind him and said, "Don't eat it all at once. Save some and eat it tomorrow." Just as the burly man's family sat around the table and were about to swallow their tongues in front of the delicacies they had never eaten before, Li Yi was also sitting at the table. 2 pairs of eyes looked at him in confusion. After a long time, Lu Rui was the first to ask, "Is today an important day?" "No." Li Yi shook his head and said, "If it's not an important day, then why is the food so sumptuous?" The confusion in Lu Rui's eyes deepened. Because of willfulness? Li Yi really did not know how to answer this question. Wasn't it just cooking 2 extra dishes? Did he really have to give a reason? Couldn't he make a good meal for the brat to reward him for being tired from class? This reason did not seem very convincing, because he had not taught the brat for a few days. He sighed in his heart. It seemed like he had to quickly improve the family's living standards. He really could not stand the days where he could only eat a piece of meat during the holidays. He picked up a piece of chicken meat and tasted it. He could not help but nod in satisfaction. As expected of a second-class protected animal, the taste was not something the hens raised by Madame Wu could compare to. Lu Rui glanced at him and did not say anything. After all, the food she ate every day was worlds apart from before. In comparison, she was not so concerned about the source of the food. As for how many chickens Madame Wu had lost, it had nothing to do with her. She had never eaten the 2 dishes in front of her before. They smelled good. Soon, Lu Rui's attention was diverted elsewhere. "Oh right, there's almost no food at home." After dinner, it was Li Yi who cleaned up the mess as usual. When Lu Rui walked out, Li Yi said casually, The footsteps at the door paused, and soon a voice was heard. Rui will go down the mountain tomorrow. I will ask her to buy some food. Go down the mountain? Li Yi's eyes lit up when he heard that. Green Willow Mountain was located in the Qing and prefecture of the Jing Kingdom. After going down the mountain and walking along the official road for about 2 hours, the prefecture was located. Li Yi had been on the mountain for quite some time. Although he had 100 copper coins in his wallet, he could not spend them on the mountain. He had long wanted to see the prosperous world below the mountain and experience the luxurious life of the ancient times. He wanted to know what it was like. Chapter 28. The Anqing Prefecture was located in the southwest of the Jing Kingdom. It was once the capital of the Jing Kingdom and was extremely prosperous. It was the second largest capital city in the Jing Kingdom, after Jingdu at this moment. On the official road leading to the southwest gate of the Anqing Prefecture, a few sturdy horses with shiny fur galloped over. A woman dressed in white pulled on the reins, and the horses let out a long neigh in pain. They raised their hooves high in the air and stopped some distance away from the city gate. Neigh! A few sounds rang out in succession. A few sturdy men skillfully dismounted from their horses. The horses' hooves trampled the ground in a chaotic manner, stirring up a cloud of dust. Son-in-law, we've arrived at the prefecture. The burly man with the surname Fong grabbed Li Yi's arm and jumped down from his horse. Li Yi raised his head and looked at the city walls that were dozens of feet high. He couldn't see the end of the city walls on either side. He couldn't help but feel his legs turn to jelly and his vision become dizzy. Blurg! He held onto a willow tree by the moat and vomited for a while. Only then did the feeling of extreme discomfort subside a little. Of course, he didn't feel a sense of admiration, just because he saw the city walls that were more than 10 meters high. Instead, he used this behavior to express the shock in his heart. For a person who had never ridden a horse before, the fact that he was still able to stand after being forced to ride on a horse for more than 10 kilometers on a bumpy mountain road was already proof that Li Yi's body was very strong. His first trip to the prefecture city wasn't as perfect as Li Yi had imagined. Before he even entered the city gates, his entire body already felt like it was going to collapse. Son-in-law, your body is too weak. You need to train properly. The burly man with the surname Fong couldn't help but say, when he saw Li Yi's uncomfortable appearance. He had only ridden a horse for a short while, and he was already vomiting like this. This new son-in-law was good in every aspect, but his body was too weak. He didn't seem like a man at all. Li Yi glared fiercely at the burly man, and couldn't be bothered to speak to him. He turned his head and looked at the bustling city with a relatively formal gaze for the first time. There was an endless stream of pedestrians going in and out of the city gates. Goods and carriages were mixed among them. It looked crowded but orderly. Looking inside the city gates, there were even more people. The streets on both sides were filled with all kinds of stalls. One could even hear the hawkers' shouts from outside the city gates. Li Yi followed Lu Rui and the others into the city gates. He finally felt the prosperity of the city. The streets under his feet were all paved with square bluestones. The buildings on both sides of the street had rolled-up eaves with carved balustrades and painted phoenixes. It was full of ancient vibe. Passers-by dressed in ancient costumes passed by him, which made Li Yi realize once again what kind of world he was in now. The horse that the burly man with the surname Fong was leading was certainly not the property of the Willow Leaf Village. The Jing Kingdom had always been short of horses. To a large extent, they had to rely on importing horses from other countries to meet their normal needs. The price of a horse in the market was about 70 to 80 taels of silver. At this time, 1 tael of silver was about equivalent to 1,000 copper coins. Li Yi roughly estimated the price of goods in this era. 1 copper coin was probably equivalent to 50 cents in the future. In this way, a horse should be converted into RMB, which should be a lot of money anyway. If every family in the Willow Leaf Village had a horse, they wouldn't have to eat rice and vegetables. The average standard of living would definitely be above moderately well off, and they would take big strides into the middle class. This was just like an old saying that a person who rode a handsome horse was not necessarily a prince. It could also be a horse breeder. Yes, raising horses was the sideline of some people in the Willow Leaf Village, including the burly man with the surname Fong. Most of these people's fathers were mountain bandits, so they had the pure blood of mountain bandits. Mountain bandits who didn't know how to raise horses were not good mountain bandits. Fortunately, they all inherited the excellent genes of their fathers. Although they all looked rough, their equestrian skills were superior to ordinary people. They could use this skill to earn some extra money and supplement their family income. However, since ancient times, most of the coolies could only get enough food and clothing. The exploitation in the feudal society was even more serious. The wages they received could only ensure that their families wouldn't starve to death. Every month, the burly man would take these horses down the mountain for inspection and collect their wages for the previous month. On the way here, Li had asked him about it. The monthly wage for raising a horse was 100 copper coins, which was pitifully low. It was only enough to buy a few caddies of rice. Furthermore, there were only 4 months of time to raise a horse every year. With a few hundred copper coins, they would have to support them for an entire year. After making an appointment to meet at the place where they would go back, the burly man with the surname Fong and the others took the horses and left. In the blink of an eye, Li Yi and Rui also disappeared, leaving him alone. This made Li Yi confused. Weren't they afraid that he would take the opportunity to run away? Thinking of the crazy old man who wanted to catch him, he couldn't go back to his previous home. Weighing the money bag, Li suddenly felt that staying in the Willow Leaf Village was not bad. He spent 4 copper coins to buy 2 steamed buns on the street and took a bite. The skin was thin, and there was a lot of filling. After eating the 2 steamed buns, the hunger in his stomach suddenly disappeared. Li Yi couldn't help sighing in his heart. In the past, when he bought steamed buns outside, he couldn't even see the filling after taking a bite. Those guys who only had money in their eyes wanted to sell steamed buns as steamed buns. In comparison, the people in ancient times were more honest. He had already spent 4 of the 128 copper coins. Originally, Li Yi wanted to rely on this money to live a good life, but the reality was cruel. After walking around the street, Li found that it seemed that he could only eat steamed buns. Whether in modern or ancient times, he was poor, which made Li inexplicably sad in his heart. Especially after seeing the prosperity of Anqing Prefecture, Li had made up his mind to immediately think of ways to make money when he went back. Modern people had their pride, not to mention that he had a cheating device that could be said to be against nature. If he still lived a life of eating rice and vegetables all day, it would be too embarrassing for a time traveler. While walking around, he bought some vegetable seeds from a roadside stall. He happened to see hawthorn selling in a nearby stall, so he also bought a few kilograms. He hadn't used the white sugar that he had embezzled last time, and it had been a long time since he had tasted the taste of candied hawthorn. Even in the entire Jing Kingdom, Anqing Prefecture could be considered as one of the most prosperous cities. There were brothels, and rows upon rows of brothels. It was a pity that Li Yi could only wander in front of these places. After walking around the street, he was a little tired, so he found a corner to rest. This was a street corner with slightly less people. Not far from Li Yi, there was a table and a chair. On the table there was a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. There were also some paper tubes on the side. A young scholar was sitting there, holding a thread-bound book in his hands, and reading it attentively. These days, when scholars were short of money, it was a very common thing to set up a table and sell paintings and calligraphy on the street. Just as Li Yi was thinking about whether or not he should do the same in the future, when he was short of money, a man wearing coarse clothes suddenly ran over from afar. He ran up to the scholar, said a few words while panting, and then left. After the man left, the scholar's expression immediately became a little anxious and nervous. He suddenly raised his head and saw Li Yi standing under a nearby tree. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he quickly walked over. Chapter 29. Under Li Yi's flabbergasted gaze, the scholar walked in front of him and cupped his hands in greeting. With a slightly hurried tone he said, "Brother, I have some urgent matters at home." Could you help me look after this painting stall for a moment? Once I'm done with the matters at home, I'll rush over as soon as possible. Li could tell that the scholar had really encountered something, since he had nothing better to do, and he didn't know when Lu Rui and the burly man surnamed Fong would arrive. He wouldn't lose anything by helping the scholar look after his stall. He could even find a place to rest, so why not? Under the scholar's expectant gaze, Li nodded. Many thanks, brother. Seeing that Li had agreed, the scholar's face lit up with joy. After saying a word of thanks, he hurriedly left. After the scholar left, Li walked to the front of the painting stall and sat on a chair. He picked up the book that the scholar had been reading and began to leisurely read it. After a few minutes, Li shook his head and threw the book to the side. The book was filled with biographies of some people. It was dry and boring to the extreme. He didn't know how the scholar had read it with such relish. Li was only a fake scholar. It was difficult for him to sit there and not move while reading this thing. He looked at the table and saw a completed painting. The painting was of a woman. Her face was like a hibiscus, her figure was slim, and she was quite beautiful. He casually pulled out a few paper tubes and opened them. They were all completed paintings of people and landscapes. From a layman's point of view, the scholar's painting skills were not bad. However, when he thought about it, it was normal. In this era, even if scholars weren't proficient in poetry and painting, they would definitely know a little. If they didn't have some skill, they would be embarrassed to call themselves a scholar. Looking at the things like brushes, ink and paints, Li couldn't help but feel an itch. Over the past few days, he had also digested quite a number of books on painting techniques. In his heart, he was still thinking that if he couldn't make it in the future, he would learn from this scholar and set up a painting stall on the street. He would definitely not starve to death by selling paintings for a living. There was no more Xian paper in the stockade village. Li had never found an opportunity to practice. He rolled up the painting on the table and put it aside. He grabbed a blank piece of Xian paper and dipped the brush in ink. After thinking for a while, he raised the brush and started drawing on the paper. Before long, the outline of a woman's face appeared on the paper. Although the facial features were not drawn, it was not difficult to tell that the person Li wanted to draw was Lu Rui based on the shape of the face. It's my first time drawing a 3D character, so I'll use her to practice. Recalling Lu Rui's cold expression, Li Yi's face curled into a wicked smile. When he put down his brush, he began to draw the facial features and figure. 3D painting sounded very difficult and pretentious, but it was nothing more than the handling of light and shadow, the difference in proportions, and some techniques of composition. As long as one had a little bit of painting foundation, it was actually not difficult to grasp. Although it was his first time drawing a 3D character, he had actually practiced it countless times in his mind. He did not stop his brush at all. Not long after, a woman who looked similar to Lu Rui appeared on the Xian paper. However, it was different from ordinary paintings. The woman in the painting not only had a vivid expression and was no different from a real person, but she also had a little more liveliness, as if she would walk out of the painting in the next moment. Ordinary 3D paintings were mostly done through the control of proportions and the adjustment of light and shadow. It needed to be looked at from a certain special angle in order to display the 3D effect. Li had slightly weakened this aspect so that the 3D effect was not as strong. He had greatly preserved the good proportions and created a vivid feeling. Those overly impactful images were not easy for the people of this era to accept. Change had to be done bit by bit, and this was only a small attempt by Li. After finishing the painting, Li looked at it carefully for a while and nodded, indicating that he was satisfied with his work. When he looked up, he suddenly saw an unfamiliar face. Because Li Yi's action was too abrupt, the other party did not seem to be able to react. The tips of their noses were only a few centimeters apart. If they were a little closer, perhaps Li Yi's first kiss after coming to this world would be lost. Especially when the other party was a man. Although this man was a little handsome, if such a thing really happened, he was afraid that he would feel disgusted for at least 10 days to half a month. Who are you? Li suddenly took 2 steps back and looked at the young man standing on the other side of the table with a look of disgust. He was looking at Lu Rui's painting with an amazed gaze and blurted out. The luxuriously dressed young man, who looked to be about the same age as Li Yi, was still staring at the painting that Li Yi had just completed. He clicked his tongue in admiration. This painting is so strange. The woman in the painting seems to be walking out of the paper. Li Yi curled his lips. Although this guy was dressed decently, he was still a bumpkin who had not seen much of the world. It was just a 3D painting, and he was already so surprised. This painting is really strange, the young man murmured. Then he looked up at Li Yi and said with interest, "Use this style and draw one for me." "No." Li did not even look at him. He said lightly and sat back in the chair. After standing for so long, his waist was sore. It was still more comfortable to sit. "Why?" The young man was stunned when he heard this and asked. "Sorry, my principle is to only paint women, not men," Li Yi said lazily. The young man raised his eyebrows. He did not expect that a street art dealer would have such a rule. He looked at him from head to toe and suddenly said, "1 tael of silver." 1 tael of silver? Li Yi heard this and was slightly moved. 1 tael of silver was almost equivalent to 1,000 copper coins. With the current market price, it was enough to buy 2 meters of rice. 1 meter of rice was about 150 caddies. Even if they ate rice every day, it would be enough for a family of 4 to eat for a long time. Looking at this guy's clothes, he did not look like a poor person. Just the jade pendant hanging on his waist was probably worth a lot of money. He should not be lying. However, as a man, how could he bend his back for a mere 2 meters of rice? Li shook his head and said, "I won't paint for 1 tael of silver." 5 taels. The young man saw that Li Yi was obviously moved, and his lips curled into a smile as he spoke again. 5 taels of silver, 10 meters of rice. Li Yi's expression was conflicted. After a long time, he squeezed out a few words from his throat. "I won't paint for 5 taels." As a man, he would not bend his back even for 10 meters of rice. 10 taels. The young man's expression was calm as he spoke again. As soon as he finished speaking, Li Yi abruptly stood up from his chair. This sudden action startled the young man. At the sight of this scene, a few figures who were squatting in a corner nearby stood up abruptly, their hands involuntarily reaching for their waists. At this moment, Li Yi warmly patted the young man's shoulder and smiled. "When I first saw you, I felt a sense of familiarity. Now that I think about it, you look very much like an old friend of mine. Based on this point alone, what harm is there in breaking the rules today?" Seeing that the scholar in front of him seemed to have changed into a different person, the young man was stunned and could not react for a moment. Chapter 30. This scholar is also a wonderful person. After about an hour, the young nobleman glanced at Li Yi and nodded with satisfaction as he held the portrait that Li Yi had just drawn for him. He snapped his fingers lightly, and a passerby who was squatting at a nearby stall immediately stood up. He took out a silver ingot from his bosom and threw it on the table in front of Li Yi with a paw sound. The money and goods were settled. Seeing the young nobleman walking away, the passers-by around him suddenly reduced by half. Li Yi imitated the scene in the TV and bit the ingot with his teeth, but he didn't bite anything. He raised his head and saw that the passers-by were looking at him with an unusually fiery gaze. He hurriedly put the silver ingot in his bosom. To some extent, this was the first pot of gold he had truly earned after coming to this world. Don't look down on these 10 taels of silver. With the current market price of 1 tael of silver, 1 tael of silver could buy 2 stone meters of rice. These 10 taels of silver were enough for a family of 4 to live on for several years. Touching the silver ingot in his bosom, Li couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The people in the city were indeed rich. In this way, he only needed to draw a painting like this every day, and he would soon be able to live an early retirement life. Of course, this was only the most ideal situation, except for that nobleman who looked dignified, but seemed to have a screw loose in his head. There were probably not many people who would spend 10 taels of silver to buy such a painting. With the silver ingot in hand, Li Yi's mood was much better. He lay comfortably on the chair and basked in the sun while waiting for the scholar to come back. This time, He didn't have to wait for long. The figure of the scholar hurriedly ran over. The two of them exchanged some greetings. The scholar gratefully held on to Li Yi's hand and didn't let go. He kept saying thank you until Li Yi noticed that the passers-by's gazes had changed. Only then did he hurriedly wave his hand, indicating that he wanted to leave. Of course, before he left, he took the portrait of Rui with him. The scholar didn't say anything about it. Instead, he told Li Yi his address and invited him to come over and compare his painting skills when he had the time. Holding the 10 taels of silver, Li Yi felt a lot more at ease. He could now pay for the things he couldn't afford just now. However, he already had a lot of things in his hands. It would be better to wait for the big fellow surnamed Fong and the others to return. After all, there was free labor for him to use. It would be a waste not to use it. He walked to the big willow tree where he had agreed to meet Lu Rui and the others. He found a clean rock and sat down, waiting for Mr. Fong and the others to return. At this moment, Li Yi did not notice that not far behind him, a young man with a protruding mouth and ape-like cheeks was staring at his back with a greedy glint in his eyes. After looking around for a while, the young man's figure quickly disappeared into an alley. After Li Yi left, the scholar began to pack up his things. Huh? Why are you packing up so early today? A clear voice came from the front. The scholar raised his head and saw who it was. He smiled and said, "So it's Miss Xiao Chui. I had some matters to attend to at home today, so I packed up a bit early. Miss, are you here to pick up a painting?" The girl, who appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old, had her hair combed into 2 buns, and her face had some baby fat on it. She nodded and said, "Is the painting done? The young lady sent me to pick it up early in the morning." The scholar smiled and nodded. He handed over a painting tube on the table and said, "It's done. Miss Xiao Chui, open it and take a look. If there's anything you're not satisfied with, feel free to point it out. We can still make changes." The girl waved her hand and said, "There's no need. The young lady is in a hurry. After I pick up the painting, I have to hurry back." The girl didn't have any doubts about the scholar's painting skills. She casually took the painting tube from the scholar and took out a few silver coins from her waist pouch. She placed them on the table and hurriedly left. The scholar packed up his things and placed them in a nearby restaurant before quickly leaving. At this moment, Li Yi's situation wasn't very good. Seeing a few strangers slowly approaching him, Li Yi stood up with a vigilant expression. His intuition told him that trouble was coming. Just as he was about to walk away, 2 people appeared on either side of him. Their physiques were comparable to the large man surnamed Fong. It was clear that they weren't people that Li Yi could deal with. In the blink of an eye, Li Yi understood what had happened. He was afraid that when he took out the silver just now, someone had seen it. He was surrounded on 3 sides, and there was an alley behind him. Li Yi didn't even think before running inside. Seeing his actions, the people didn't chase after him. Instead, they all revealed a mocking smile. Does that scholar really have silver on him? Walking to the entrance of the alley, the leader of the group, a man with a knife scar on his face, suddenly stopped and turned to look at the young man with the protruding mouth and ape-like cheeks. It was no wonder that he was curious. Looking at that person's clothes, he was just a poor scholar. He didn't look like a rich person at all. When the young man heard this, he immediately said with a flattering expression, "Big brother, how could I dare to lie to you? I just saw him take out such a big ingot of silver with my own eyes. I'm afraid that it's at least 10 silver coins." As he said this, he extended his hand and gestured with his fist to the large man. 10 silver coins. The knife-scarred man licked his lips. 10 silver coins was enough for him to live a carefree life for a while, as long as he didn't go to the famous money-squandering dens in the city. "Go in." The large man waved his hand, and everyone entered the alley. Damn it. After running for more than 10 steps, he saw a high wall at the end of the alley. Li Yi cursed. He didn't think that this would be a dead end. When he turned his head, he saw that those people had already entered. "Scholar, do you want to hand over the silver coins yourself, or do you want us to help you?" The leader of the knife-scarred man walked in front of Li Yi with a face full of ridicule. He crossed his arms and looked at him condescendingly. This large man had the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. He was at least 1.9 meters tall, close to 2 meters. He was a full head taller than Li Yi. When he spoke, he completely looked down on Li Yi. The people behind him also looked at him with a mocking gaze. It was as if they were looking at a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. The silver coins that had just been in his hands hadn't even warmed up when they were about to be snatched away. The grievance in Li Yi's heart at this time couldn't be described with words. Li Yi did not even think of resisting. Not to mention this ferocious-looking burly man. Li Yi felt that he only had a chance of winning if he fought against the wretched young man behind him. If he lost the silver coins, he could earn it again. If he lost his life, he would have nothing. Even if these people didn't intend to take his life, they would certainly beat him up. This was something that Li Yi didn't want to see. He sighed in his heart. He raised his hand and reached into his bosom, preparing to take out the ingot of silver. Seeing Li Yi's action, a smile appeared on the large man's face. This scholar is quite tactful. This thought just appeared in the large man's mind. In the next moment, his smile froze on his face. Damn knife scar, what did you just say? Say it again for me to hear. In the eyes of the knife-scarred man, the scholar's hand had already reached into his bosom, but he suddenly took it out. His face suddenly changed into a mocking and disdainful expression as he looked at him indifferently. Chapter 31. Damn Dao Ba. What did you just say? Say it again for me to hear? Surrounded by more than 10 burly men in the narrow alley, the handsome scholar looked disdainfully at the leader of the group, Dao Ba. His voice was clearly transmitted to everyone's ears. The people behind Dao Ba were stunned. They didn't dare to believe that at this moment, this scholar actually dared to say such words? Was he not afraid of death? It should be known that the boss hated it when people mentioned the word Dao Ba in front of him. Quietly looking at the boss's ashen face, everyone couldn't help but take a step back. They were worried that the scene that was about to happen would be too cruel and bloody. What did you just say? Say it again? Dao Ba looked at Li Yi with an ashen face. His eyes flashed with a dangerous glint. It's fine if you're ugly, but to think that there's something wrong with your ears as well. Just what kind of beliefs have supported you to live until now? Li Yi looked at the scarred man with a pitiful gaze and said with some pity, what kind of belief has supported me to live until now? The people behind Dao Ba were stunned when they heard this. They didn't immediately understand the meaning of this sentence. When it came to scolding people, as a young man of the 21st century, Li Yi's level was clearly several streets ahead of the people of this era. These ruffians who hadn't even read a book, who knew how many brain cells had died. It took a while for them to understand the meaning of this sentence. Afterwards, everyone looked at Li Yi with a strange expression. In their eyes, there was actually a faint kind of worship. This scholar's mouth was too poisonous. These ruffians of the ancient times were usually full of profanities, but it was just trash, stupid pig, and other vulgar words that didn't have any technical difficulty. Those with a little bit of cultural literacy might say a few words in classical Chinese, such as your mother's maid, your mother is a concubine, and so on. But who would take swearing to such a high level? What kind of belief has supported you to live until now? There wasn't a single profanity in this sentence, but if one were to talk about the meaning, it was more profound than all the swearing. This was simply raising swearing to a new level, courting death. The scarred man's face had long since turned red. Li Yi's words had successfully aroused his anger, making him want to immediately destroy the scholar in front of him and completely disappear from this world. As he roared, he clenched his fist and smashed it toward Li Yi's face. The 2-meter-tall man had an incomparably sturdy physique. One of his arms was as thick as Li Yi's thigh. The muscles on his exposed arms were bulging, and his sandbag-sized fists carried a whistling sound, full of momentum. If this full-force punch really landed on Li Yi's face, he would probably have to go through another glorious transmigration. However, the man's fist did not land on Li Yi's face in the end. The long sword on his neck was like a bucket of cold water poured on his head, extinguishing all the anger in the man's heart. His fist stopped in midair, and beads of cold sweat rolled down his forehead. Hiss! The surrounding people sucked in a breath of cold air and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Their faces were pale as they looked at the beautiful woman who had appeared out of nowhere and held a cold sword on their boss's neck. The cold light of the long sword was cold and incomparably sharp. It was likely that the woman holding the long sword would cut off the scarred man's head with just a little bit of force. Big brother, when did she come over? Who are you? Quickly let go of our big brother. Heroine, let's talk this out. The group of subordinates wanted to save the scarred man, but they didn't dare to act rashly. They could only stand there fearfully, not daring to take a step closer to the beautiful woman. The one who was the most frightened at this moment was, of course, the scarred man with the long sword on his neck. In the hot weather, the cold long sword was placed on his neck. Feeling the sharpness of the sword, the scarred man suddenly felt a chill from head to toe. He stood there motionlessly, afraid that if he turned his head would fall to the ground. Heroine, spare me, spare me. At this moment, he couldn't care less about his face in front of his brothers. His eyes were filled with fear, and his face was pale as he spoke in a trembling voice. What dignity? What face? How could these things be more important than his life? Li Yi was very satisfied with Lu Rui's timely arrival. Although this sister-in-law was often unreliable and would only cause trouble for him, she was quite reliable at critical moments. At this moment, Lu Rui didn't care about the man's begging for mercy. Instead, she looked at Li Yi with a strange expression, as if she was seeing him for the first time. No one knew what she was thinking. Li Yi was a little frightened by her gaze. He hurriedly looked away, and when he looked at the scarred man again, a trace of anger appeared on his face, and he kicked his butt. Robbery? Robbery? That's what you get for not learning well. The dozen ruffians behind the scarred man glared at Li Yi angrily when they saw their big brother being humiliated by the weak scholar, but no one dared to act rashly. As for the scarred man, he only felt an unprecedented sense of humiliation in his heart. He wanted to tear the scholar into pieces, but he could only endure it, because the sword was still on his neck. Stop fighting, let's go. After Li Yi kicked him a few times, Lu Rui looked away from his face. Li Yi only felt a blur in front of his eyes, and her sword had returned to its scabbard. Li Yi was stunned for a moment, and he immediately retreated to Lu Rui's side. Then he felt terrible. He had been so confident earlier, because he had a hostage in his hands. Now that the sword on the scarred man's neck was gone, could the two of them? Could Lu Rui deal with so many ruffians alone? After feeling the sword on his neck disappear, the scarred man suddenly took 2 steps forward and returned to the middle of the ruffians. He reached out his hand to touch his neck, only to realize that there was a bloodstain on his hand. A trace of fear and lingering fear appeared on his face, followed by endless anger. He pointed his finger at Li Yi and Lu Rui, revealing his white teeth, and said fiercely, "Go! Break the scholar's legs. Remember not to hurt the woman." The ruffians behind him rolled up their sleeves, and their eyes were filled with murderous intent. When they looked at Lu Rui, their eyes swept over her body, and they couldn't help but lick their lips, and a trace of greed appeared in their eyes. Lu Rui's pretty face did not change as she watched the ruffians approach, but there was a faint trace of mockery and disdain in the depths of her eyes. "Son-in-law, second lady, so you're here." At this moment, a rough voice suddenly rang out from the alley. Chapter 32. Just when Li Yi was worried that Lu Rui would not be able to deal with these ruffians, Mr. Fong appeared at the entrance of the alley just in time. The burly man surnamed Fong was not alone. The other men who had come down from the stronghold with him were also by his side. "Get out of here. This is none of your business." At this time, the scar-faced man was unable to restrain his anger. Suddenly, he saw a group of idlers appear at the entrance of the alley. He coldly berated them, and was about to personally break the legs of the scholar, who had just kicked him in the butt in front of so many of his brothers, causing him to lose all face. "Get out of here. If you don't, I'll beat you too." Seeing that the few Tian Shihan were still standing at the entrance of the alley, even though their big brother had already given the order, he immediately yelled out in anger and walked towards the burly man surnamed Fong. There were more than 10 people on their side, and the number of people on the other side was less than half of their number. The young man was not afraid when he walked over. He pointed at Mr. Fong's nose and scolded, "What are you still doing here? Hurry up!" He swallowed the word "get out" before he could say it. To be precise, he was kicked back by Mr. Fong. Although he hadn't figured out what was going on, this group of ignorant ruffians was obviously looking for trouble with the son-in-law and the second Mississippi. How could the burly man surnamed Fong be polite to them? He lifted his foot and kicked them. A figure suddenly flew from the entrance of the alley. He crossed a distance of 2 or 3 feet and smashed into the crowd. 2 people were instantly knocked down to the ground. They struggled for a long time, but could not get up. The sudden turn of events caused the entire place to fall silent. Li Yi stared blankly at the young man, who was kicked 5 or 6 meters away by Mr. Fong. He was a little stunned. To be honest, he had only seen such a scene in action movies in his life. However, movies were just movies. When he saw such a scene in reality, the shock in his heart was still indescribable. That man, who had always looked simple and honest, was actually so strong. Li Yi was not the only one who was stunned. The scar-faced man and his group of ruffians were also stunned. Seeing their underlings being kicked away and lying on the ground, unable to get up, after a short moment of shock, everyone's expressions became fierce. However, as vicious as they were, there were others who were even more vicious than them. The burly man surnamed Fong couldn't hold it in any longer. He shouted at the top of his lungs and rushed forward like a bull. "Are you blind? How dare you bully our Willow Leaf village? You even dare to find trouble with second young mistress and young master. You must be tired of living. It's been a long time since I've fought with anyone. My body is itching. I finally made it this time." Almost in the next second, several men behind the burly man surnamed Fong also rushed forward. Their faces were full of excited expressions, and they were quite eager to have a try. As a mountain bandit, they had always been the ones bullying others. When had they ever been bullied by others? Although they had been good for a long time, the aggressive nature in their bones couldn't be erased. Before those ruffians could react, several people had already rushed in front of them. Fight without a word. At this moment, Li Yi deeply understood the meaning of this sentence. The burly man was like a tiger in a flock of sheep. When they raised their hands and chopped down, there would be one person lying on the ground. Their movements were bold and beautiful. This was a complete crushing of strength. In just a dozen breaths of time, everyone, including the scar-faced man, was lying on the ground. They were either holding their arms or legs, crying and shouting for their parents. On the contrary, the burly man surnamed Fong and his group were not red or out of breath. There was no sweat on their foreheads. They stood there and rubbed their palms. Their eyes swept back and forth among the ruffians lying on the ground, as if they wanted to continue. Bang! The scar-faced man had just used his hands to prop himself up. After the burly man surnamed Fong kicked him, he lay on the ground and didn't dare to move again. Bah! Several people spat on the ground at the same time, their eyes full of contempt. Li Yi understood the meaning in the eyes of the burly man surnamed Fong and his group. You scum with less than 5 battle power. You don't even have the qualifications to make this or take action. He watched as the usually smiling, straightforward, and honest men turned into super scions one by one, completely different from the people he knew before. They were just a group of farmers, but they actually had 2 faces. Even Li Yi had begun to suspect whether this group of people had a split personality or something. However, this was not important for the time being. Under the puzzled gazes of the burly man surnamed Fong and his group, Li Yi jogged over to the ruffians lying on the ground and skillfully fished out a few copper coins, a few silver coins, and a few copper coins from their pockets. At this moment, he was thinking that since the other party wanted his silver, they would naturally have to pay the same price. This group of poor people didn't even bring more money when they came out. This bit of money wasn't even enough to compensate him for the mental damage. Li Yi, who was busy collecting the mental damage compensation, didn't know that the burly man surnamed Fong and the others behind him were watching his skillful movements with their mouths agape. Damn, this awareness, this technique. Who the F***ck is the real bandit here? In a short while there were already many people outside the alley. Since ancient times, those who were watching a good show would never complain about things getting bigger. In this era where entertainment wasn't abundant, even if it was a fight, there would be people watching it as a good show. Watching a few unfamiliar men beat up the famous ruffians of this generation to the ground, the crowd was shocked, but also felt incomparably carefree, and couldn't help but cheer loudly. Warrior, well fought! What a delightful sight! This group of ruffians should have had this day a long time ago. What are you all crowding around here for? Out of the way! Out of the way! The bailiffs are here! After a burst of noise, a few people wearing the uniforms of bailiffs with weapons in their hands squeezed in from outside. When they saw the situation in the alley, they shouted loudly and ran inside. The bailiffs are here, let's retreat. Seeing this, the burly man surnamed Feng laughed loudly and sprinted to the corner of the wall. With a leap, he used the tip of his toes to push off the wall twice and climbed up the high wall with one hand. In the time of 2 breaths, he had already disappeared over the top of the wall. Second miss, I'll leave the son-in-law to you. The rest of the people also laughed and imitated the burly man surnamed Feng, climbing up the wall like nimble monkeys. In his heart, Li Yi was still amazed at the speed at which they climbed up the wall. If they were in the modern era, they would definitely be outstanding neighbors. Just as he was feeling extremely envious, he suddenly felt his shoulder tighten, and his whole body flew up as light as a feather. Lu Rui grabbed onto Li Yi's shoulder, and with a light leap, the two of them were already standing on the top of the wall. With another tap of their toes, they disappeared from the eyes of the crowd. The bailiffs watched helplessly as Li Yi and the others climbed over the wall and left. Standing there, they could only look at the wall and sigh. It couldn't be helped. With their skills, there was no way they could climb such a high wall. Chapter 33. Where are they? The constables were looking at the wall, not knowing how to chase after them. Suddenly, a voice came from behind them. Hearing this voice, everyone felt as if they had been granted amnesty. They turned their heads and pointed at the high wall behind them, saying weakly, "They ran away." Ran away? Why aren't you chasing after them? The woman wearing the uniform of a constable with a saber hanging from her waist glared at the constables. With a light leap, she was already on top of the wall. Just as she was about to chase after them, the constables below were shocked and hurriedly shouted, "Boss, wait! Is there anything else?" The female constable turned around and asked with a frown. One of the constables immediately said, "There are too many of them. It's too dangerous for the boss to go alone. Call a few more brothers later, and we'll definitely be able to catch them." "Yes, boss." Everyone obviously didn't want the female constable to chase after them. At this moment, another constable stepped forward and pointed at the ruffian who was still lying on the ground, saying, "What should we do with these people? Should we send them to the clinic first?" The woman glanced at the knife-scarred man and the others. She did not hide the disgust on her face and coldly said, "They are not good people either. Capture them first and lock them up. We'll talk after we interrogate them." When the constables heard this, their faces all turned bitter. Usually, when they encountered street fights like this, if the circumstances were not serious, they would be punished and punished. This kind of thing happened a few times a day. If they were arrested and sent to the prison cell every time, wouldn't they as constables be busy to death? However, even though they were extremely unwilling, they still had to obediently carry out this lady's order. Not to mention her status as a constable, they were supposed to be under her jurisdiction. Even the county magistrate had to be polite to her, let alone them, who were just mere constables. Dejectedly, she walked to the ruffian who was still howling on the ground and kicked him hard. "Get up and follow us back to the county yamen." The development of the situation had taken a turn. The scarred man and the other ruffians were dumbfounded. They couldn't figure out how these constables handled cases. This time they were clearly the victims, okay? Seeing that these constables had no room for negotiation, they felt as if they had eaten Chinese gold thread, bitter. He looked at these constables with resentment in his eyes. His heart was filled with resentment. You guys are abusing your power. You guys are handling the case recklessly. You guys are blind. One was happy while the other was sad. The ruffians were taken away dejectedly, but the onlookers couldn't help but cheer. Obviously, these people had been bullied by them a lot. This time, I'll let you off for now. The valiant and formidable-looking female constable stood on top of the wall. She glanced in a certain direction and leaped down lightly. A constable trotted over with a fawning look on his face. Boss, they've all been brought back. Outside the prefectural city, at a tea stall by the roadside. With Lu Rui grabbing onto his shoulder and flying over countless walls, Li finally witnessed what it meant to be able to leap onto roofs and vault over walls. He was a little afraid of heights, so he still had a lingering fear. When he finally got out of the city and sat down to calm himself down, the familiar voice of the man surnamed Fong came from the side. Son-in-law, why did those ruffians come for you? Even now, the man surnamed Fong was still curious about this matter. Generally speaking, if one was targeted by those ruffians, it was either because they were rich or because they were colored. These two. If those ruffians liked men, then what happened just now would be easy to explain. Although the young master didn't have much money, even the man surnamed Fong couldn't deny that in the eyes of those with special hobbies, the young master was probably a rare beauty. What's so strange about that? They wanted to rob me. Li glanced at the man surnamed Fong and said, Haha. The man surnamed Fong and the others were stunned at first, but then they laughed honestly. Their faces clearly showed that they didn't believe him at all. Those ruffians also had proper business to do. So many people were gathered there just to rob a few copper coins? They had never seen such idle ruffians. It seemed like it was really because of the second reason. The man surnamed Fong thought in his heart with absolute certainty. This time, even Lu Rui looked at Li Yi with a slightly mocking expression. This obvious expression of disbelief dealt a huge blow to Li Yi's self-esteem. Lu Rui was fine, but Li Yi was already used to it. Even these ruffians dared to look down on him. Why would he tell them that he had earned 10 taels of silver with a wave of his hand? He took out the silver ingot and slammed it on the table. He ignored the shocked gazes of the man surnamed Fong and the others and continued to drink his tea. 10 taels of silver was undoubtedly an astronomical figure to the people present. If they were frugal, their families wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing for the next few years. They worked hard to herd the horses for a month, but their wages were only about 100 copper coins. The silver ingot in front of them was more than 100 times their wages. Even Lu Rui's pretty face finally lit up. She looked at Li Yi again. After a long time, the man surnamed Fong swallowed a mouthful of saliva and raised his head to look at Li Yi as he asked, Young master, this silver, could it be that you stole it? Other than this reason, he couldn't believe that Li Yi had managed to earn so much money in such a short period of time. What a bumpkin! Li Yi cast a disdainful glance at the burly man with the surname Fong. He waved the painting tube in his hand and said faintly, This is the meticulous brushwork fee for painting for people in the city just now. Painting? The man surnamed Fong was stunned. 10 taels of silver for a painting? How was this painting? This was clearly robbery. They thought about how they had worked so hard for a few copper coins. But this person had earned 10 taels of silver in such a short period of time. Everyone felt sad, but when they raised their heads to look at Li Yi, their expressions changed drastically. As expected of a scholar, young master was still the best. Not to mention 10 taels of silver. Even if they were given 1 or 2 taels of silver, their lives in the stockade village would not be so difficult. It was even possible that they could eat meat every few days. Although these people were only boorish men, Li still felt a little proud to be looked at by so many boorish men with such admiring gazes. When people were proud, they would always feel a little inflated. Looking at everyone's admiring gazes, Li felt extremely comfortable. He waved his hand and said in an extremely forthright manner, Today's tea is on me. The total cost of tea for the few of them was only 5 copper coins. Li Yi took back the silver and happily paid the bill with his private stash. Suddenly he felt something. When he turned his head, he realized that Lu Rui was looking at him strangely. Chapter 34. For any family in Willow Leaf Village, 10 taels of silver was a huge sum of money. Even for Lu Rui, it was the first time she had seen so much money in her life. But at this moment, when she looked at Li Yi, she was thinking about more than this. A few days ago, on Chinese Valentine's Day, the poem Celestial on the Magpie Bridge was widely spread in Willow Leaf Village. Even illiterate girls in the village could recite it completely. Lu Rui did not know much about poetry. When she heard Li Yi's poem from Xiaohuan's mouth, she only found it to be catchy. It sounded rather interesting. Especially the last sentence. If love lasts forever, why stay together day and night? It seemed to make some sense. Of course, there were times when she would think about more things. If she didn't have a deep understanding of the relationship between a man and a woman, she definitely wouldn't be able to write such a poem. Had this scholar experienced something exciting in the past? Could it be that in his heart, there was also a woman whom he yearned for but couldn't meet? But on the surface, it didn't seem like it. Thinking of his lazy, greedy face, and his stealing second aunt's chicken, it was hard to imagine what a powerful poem such a person could write. However, she could only think about it in her heart, and it was not appropriate to ask him. As for deeper things, such as whether a poem was good or bad, or how good it was, she had no concept of these things in her heart. Poetry was something that scholars played with. She could grab any scholar off the street, and he or she would probably be able to come up with something similar. But after seeing some things with her own eyes, she realized that things didn't seem to be like this. Just now, when she was buying some women's daily necessities on the street, she happened to overhear 2 women talking about a poem called Immortals of the Magpie Bridge. The content was exactly the same as the one she had heard before. Later on, when they talked about the author of the poem, both of them expressed their admiration for the gifted scholar named Li Yi. Until now, the talented scholar they were talking about gradually overlapped with the lazy figure in Lu Rui's mind. After that, she paid more attention and heard more information. For example, this poem came from a poetry meeting on the night of the Double Seventh Festival. It was said that someone picked up a prayer lantern on a pleasure boat. This poem, which caused an uproar among the literati of Anqing Prefecture, was written on this prayer lantern. Regardless of whether it was true or not, this rumor undoubtedly added a layer of mystery to the entire matter. However, this was a legendary story that most people only talked about after a meal. There were still a few people who did not doubt its authenticity. Lu Rui was one of them. She saw Xiaohuan's prayer lantern fly with her own eyes. At that time, no one in Willow Village would have thought that the ordinary poem written on the lantern would cause such a stir in a certain place. It was said that the champion of the Qixi Poetry Festival, a famous scholar from Qing'an Prefecture, had seen the poem, The Immortal of the Magpie Bridge. He tore his own poem into pieces and said, "I will never write another Qixi Poetry Festival again in this life." This shocked everyone, and it added fuel to the fire of the whole matter. After the poetry meeting, a special person compiled the Double Seventh Festival Poetry Anthology. This poem, Flying Poem from Beyond the Heavens, was ranked first. Just like that, a scholar named Li Yi was known by the literati of Qing and Prefecture, singers, actors, and many women who admired this poem. Those who were chosen to compile the poetry anthology were naturally not ordinary people. At the very least, they were talented enough to convince everyone. Since ancient times, there has been no first place in literature. In the past, there would always be a debate about the order of the poems chosen. But this time, no one had a different opinion about this Celestial on the Magpie Bridge being ranked first. At the same time, the gifted scholar called Li Yi had captured the hearts of countless young ladies with his words. If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? Of course, it wasn't just those young ladies. Some of the women who had truly experienced the twists and turns of their relationships were probably even more affected by these words. Even though his origin was still a mystery, it did not affect the admiration of the women. Even Li Yi himself did not know about this. Of course, Lu Rui knew about this. Thinking of the intoxicated expressions on the two women's faces as they talked, Lu Rui could not imagine how they would react if they knew that the peerless scholar they admired was this guy in front of her. Of course, she would never have imagined that the poem he had casually composed would be so good. Of all the scholars in Qing and Fu, not a single one could compare. Lu Rui did not know much about scholars. Even now, she still could not accept that the person she had casually snatched was so good. At this moment, she pushed these thoughts aside and lowered her head to see the paper tube that Li Yi had placed on the table. She reached out to take it. Beside her, Li Yi raised his head and saw that Lu Rui was preparing to open the painting. His heart suddenly jumped, and he hurriedly ran over, reaching out to snatch it. If she saw that he had drawn her, who knew what she would think? Naturally, Li Yi's speed could not catch up to Lu Rui. She lightly raised her hand, and Li Yi pounced on empty air. What is this? Seeing how anxious he was, Lu Rui raised her eyebrows and asked. Nothing, it's just a doodle. Li Yi laughed dryly. He could not tell the truth at this time. If she thought that he had feelings for her brother-in-law falling in love with his sister-in-law, tskk, it sounded quite exciting. Lu Rui looked at him meaningfully. She did not open the painting in her hands, and casually threw the painting tube back. Li Yi hurriedly caught it, and his heart finally relaxed. How should we spend this money? Not wanting to be entangled in this problem, Li Yi hurriedly changed the topic. Of course, to buy grain. Everyone, including the large man surnamed Fang, spoke almost in unison. To them, even if they had 100 liang of silver, it was far from being able to carry a full jar of rice at home. Living at the bottom of society, nothing could replace the importance of grain and land in their hearts. Their family was already so poor that they could not even feed themselves. They definitely had to buy grain. Even if they did not say it, Li Yi had this plan. With a wave of his hand, the group of people entered the city in a grandiose manner. At the same time, the young girl carrying the painting walked one round on the street. After buying some things, she walked into a rather lavishly decorated small building in a busy area of the street. Chapter 35. Entering through the door. What came into view was an extremely spacious hall. Many coquettishly dressed women swayed their waists as they shuttled through the hall. Occasionally, they would conveniently lie into the arms of a guest, and the man's hands would immediately become unruly. The girl carrying the painting carefully avoided the crowd and went up the stairs on the side to the second floor. After a few steps, the door beside her suddenly opened, and a man with a ruddy face walked out. The girl once again skillfully avoided him and walked straight to the door of the innermost room. If two lovers love each other for a long time, why would they be together day and night? A mellow voice came from the room. The woman in the room had finished singing one of the most famous lyrics recently and shook her head. I've practiced for a long time, but my singing is still not good enough. I've ruined this good poem. A gentle woman opposite her looked at her with a smile and said, Drunken Mo, it's your standards that are too high. Even the sisters in the workshop who are good at singing can't compare to your singing just now. But even so, it still can't compare to Sister Ruoqing. The woman sighed and said in a somewhat helpless tone. The gentle woman only smiled when she heard this, and did not speak. At this moment, the door was gently pushed open, and a young servant girl came in from outside with the painting. Miss, the painting is back. The young servant girl walked to the two of them, and first handed the painting in her hand to the woman who had just sung, and then bowed to the gentle woman. She said softly, Greetings, Miss Wan. Long time no see. Xiao Chui has become more and more beautiful, the gentle woman said with a smile. The young servant girl blushed slightly, and at this moment, the woman had already opened the painting. After looking over, she let out a sound of surprise. Who is she? The woman looked at the unfamiliar woman in the painting and asked with a puzzled expression. The person in the painting was also an extremely beautiful woman. She had an exquisite figure and wore a white tight robe. Her arms were crossed in front of her chest, and she was full of heroic spirit. At a glance, the woman in the painting seemed to be walking out of the paper, and it was extremely lifelike. This painting. In the next moment, the The woman had already forgotten that the person in the painting wasn't her. She was completely amazed by the painting. As the leading artist of the Jade's courtyard, she was very proficient in reading, writing, poetry, and painting. She was especially proficient in painting. This painting was exquisite, but there was nothing outstanding about it. However, she had never seen such a new form. There was no need for exquisite brushwork to be able to depict the characters so vividly. Not only were they lifelike, but the feeling of them leaping out of the paper was enough to amaze anyone who saw them. At this moment, the servant girl also saw the woman in the painting and couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Then, she said with a bitter expression, "Miss, I seem to have taken the wrong painting. I'll immediately exchange it." At this moment, she was feeling a little regretful. If she had known this would happen, she would have listened to the scholar's words and opened it to take a look. She wouldn't have made such a mistake. Wait a moment. When the woman heard this, she shook her head and thought for a moment. Then she said, "Leave this painting here. When you go to get the painting, tell the painter that we've bought this painting, and ask him to paint another one." When the servant girl heard this, she nodded and walked out of the room. After leaving the room, she remembered that the scholar had already closed the stall early today. If she wanted to get the painting, she would probably have to wait until tomorrow. Xiao Chui, you really are an idiot." After cursing a few times in her heart, the servant girl pouted and went downstairs dejectedly. In the room, the woman's gaze was still on the painting. Her beautiful eyes flashed with surprise from time to time. She was filled with curiosity about this painting technique that she had never seen before. When the gentle woman beside her saw her like this, she also looked over curiously. When she saw who the woman in the painting was, she couldn't help but let out a soft cry of surprise. "This painting is so strange. It's clearly on the paper, but the woman in the painting looks like she's about to walk out." The woman nodded and said, "This must be a new technique. I don't know who thought of it, but this person's attainments in painting likely far surpass mine." At this point, a look of reverence appeared on her face. She thought that she had to get to know this painting master. At the same time, her gaze moved down. When she saw where the name should have been, her expression suddenly changed, and a hint of anger appeared on her face. She scolded, "Which family's naughty child is this? How dare he randomly scribble on this painting? Li, don't let me see you." After finally recognizing the name, the anger on the woman's pretty face became even more intense. In her heart, the naughty child, named Li, had probably been spanked until his butt bloomed. At this moment, the woman did not notice that after hearing the name Li, the gentle woman beside her was stunned for a moment. Then, she hurriedly looked at the lower left corner of the painting. When she saw the crooked handwriting that looked like the handwriting of a child who had just learned to write, a deep joy suddenly appeared on her beautiful face. After confirming the familiar handwriting, she suddenly grabbed the hand of the woman beside her and said anxiously, "Zuemo, who made this painting? Quick, take me to see him." "Sister watching, what's wrong?" The woman named Zuemo had never seen the gentle woman show such an expression. After being stunned for a moment, she asked with a face full of surprise. The burly man surnamed Fong, and the others each carried 2 stone of grain on their shoulders, as they strode out of a grain shop in Qing Prefecture. The shop assistant at the door stared with wide eyes, as he watched these burly men easily carry 2 bags of rice on their shoulders, and stride like the wind. He could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. It was not that there were no people who bought so much grain at once. It was not that he was surprised by this. It was just that the strength of these burly men had truly frightened him. 10 stone of rice cost a full 5 taels of silver. In such a short time, half of Li Yi's wealth had already been spent. Although it was a little painful, Li Yi would not hesitate at all to spend the money that should be spent. The horses that had been led down the mountain in the morning still needed to be used for the next 2 days. The group could only walk back. Green Willow Mountain was not far from Anqing Prefecture. It was only about an hour's journey on foot. All the heavy objects were carried by the burly man surnamed Fong and the others. Li Yi felt relaxed. However, it had been a long time since he had walked such a long distance. When he walked back, his legs were still a little sore. The few of them carried 2 coarse cloth bags on their shoulders and swaggered through the stockade. Naturally, it was very easy to attract the attention of others. Of course, compared to these, the big man surnamed Fong was carrying a piece of pork on his shoulder that attracted more attention. Most of the people in the stockade could not even guarantee 2 meals a day. It was unknown how long it had been since many people had touched meat. Suddenly seeing this scene, the impact in their hearts was quite big. Watching them walk away, someone suddenly lowered his head and picked up something from the ground. The crowd took a closer look and found that it was actually a grain of rice. Seeming to have thought of something, everyone's expression changed involuntarily. Could it be that all the things in the bags just now were all rice? There was so much grain. Did they go down the mountain to rob it? Such an absurd thought appeared in everyone's mind. Chapter 36. For most of the families in the stockade village, there was never more than 1 bucket of rice in the rice jar at home. Their daily meals were mainly rice bran mixed with wild vegetables. The Liu family's life was slightly more prosperous, but it was at the level where they could only drink porridge. If the burly man surnamed Fong and the others were carrying rice on their shoulders, this idea was too extravagant, and they didn't even dare to think about it. It should be known that all the families in the entire Willow Leaf village combined might not even be able to gather 1 stone of rice, but those people had at least 10 stone, right? Under everyone's suspicious and shocked gazes, the burly man surnamed Fong and the others walked through the stockade village with their heads held high. When they looked at the direct descendants of the Liu family, who usually didn't get along with them, their faces were full of undisguised pride and arrogance. In this day and age, being able to fill one's stomach gave one the right to be arrogant. Those who ate porridge could look down on those who ate bran vegetables, and those who ate rice could naturally look down on those who ate porridge. Carrying rice and meat in the stockade village, one's back could be straighter than others. Xiao Huan was in the courtyard washing the clothes that Li Yi had changed out of yesterday. The courtyard door was suddenly pushed open, and the burly man surnamed Fong and the others walked in with a glowing face, carrying bags on their shoulders. Uncle Fong. Seeing Li Yi and Lu Rui behind the burly man surnamed Fong and the others, the young servant girl hurriedly stood up from the stool. Young master, where should we put the food? Walking into the courtyard, the burly man surnamed Fong shouted at the top of his voice. Li Yi pointed in the direction of the kitchen and said, "Move it all there. Leave half of the meat and 2 stone of the food. Everyone can take the rest and divide it." The burly man surnamed Fong was stunned at first, as if he couldn't believe his ears. Then he hurriedly said, "Young master, you can't we?" Li Yi waved his hand and didn't wait for the burly man surnamed Fong to continue. "I have the final say on how to divide these things. It's decided." Then, he stretched out his hand and waved it in front of the little maid, who didn't know what was happening. "Don't wash the clothes. Go and boil some hot water first. We need it for bathing later." After running around for a whole day, riding the horse all the way back, and walking all the way back, Li Yi did not have the stamina of the burly man surnamed Fong. He was unbearably tired, and there were probably a few blisters under his feet. Now he just wanted to take a comfortable hot bath, and then have a good sleep. No matter how big the matter was, he would deal with it tomorrow. The young servant girl's gaze rested on the half a fan of pork, carried by the burly man surnamed Fong for a long time. When she heard Li Yi call her, she hurriedly responded with an N, put down the clothes in her hands, and ran to boil water. "Son-in-law, wait, you really can't do this." The man surnamed Fong put down the things on his shoulder, and was about to chase after Li Yi when a figure suddenly blocked his path. "Just do as brother-in-law said just now. Everyone take these things and distribute them. Don't forget to give Elder Qin and Aunt Sun a share." Lu Rui watched Li Yi's back disappear into the house, and a strange look flashed in her beautiful eyes. Then, she turned to speak to the burly man surnamed Fong and the others. "Second Miss Wei." The burly man surnamed Fong and the others looked at her with complicated gazes, but they didn't say anything for a long time. In today's times, a few buckets of food could feed a family. The food that was distributed was enough for them to not have to worry about food for a few months. Alright, I know that everyone's days are not easy. We're all family, so there's no need to be so polite. A rare smile appeared on Lu Rui's usually cold face. After a long time, the burly man surnamed Fong turned around and saw that the few people behind him were still looking in the direction that Lu Rui disappeared with grateful eyes. He smiled honestly and punched the shoulder of the person beside him. He pointed to the kitchen and said, "What are you waiting for? Move the things in first." Wearing only a loincloth and lying in the wooden bathtub that was half the height of a person, Li immediately felt refreshed. The fatigue accumulated during the day was swept away. The only flaw was that the space in the bathtub was a little small. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely make a bathtub or dig a big bathtub at home and use it as a hot spring and a swimming pool. Xiaohuan walked in from outside and added some warm water into the bathtub. When she looked at the bathtub, her pretty face couldn't help but blush slightly. She thought about the situation when she first met the son-in-law, and her little face became even more like a ripe apple. "Son-in-law, Xiaohuan will help you wipe your back." The little servant girl picked up the towel and said softly. The little servant girl was very skilled at scrubbing his back. Her strength was neither light nor heavy. Li leaned on the edge of the bathtub and enjoyed the little servant girl's back-scrubbing service. He suddenly felt that the life of the ancient people was too extravagant and too depraved. It was already like this to have a little servant girl. He didn't know how luxurious those rich people's homes were. As a good youth of the 21st century, how could he allow himself to degenerate and be poisoned by the luxurious atmosphere of the feudal society? A man shouldn't be greedy for pleasure. Thinking like this, he opened his mouth and said to Xiaohuan, "A little to the left, a little to the left." Yes, there. After a long day of hard work, the happiest thing was to have a comfortable hot bath under the service of a beautiful servant girl, and then have a good night's sleep. It was a dreamless night of sleep until the next morning. Of course, if a beautiful servant girl could serve him in bed, it would be even better. He didn't think about having a servant girl serve him in bed. A 15 or 16-year-old girl was still underage in the future. Li wasn't that beastly. Towards this adorably silly servant girl, Li had never thought in that direction. Moreover, if he really did this, he was worried that when he woke up tomorrow morning, his wife or sister-in-law would cut off his tool of crime. A moment later, the little servant girl left the room. When she passed by the kitchen, she went in to take a look. Seeing half a piece of pork on the table and 2 stones of white rice on the side, her small mouth slightly opened. It was hard to say whether the expression on her face was surprise or joy. In the past, when she went out to buy things, she would at most buy a small bag of brown rice or flour. There wasn't any extra money at home to buy more things. This was the first time the little servant girl had seen so much food. It seems that the son-in-law bought all of this. After muttering a few words, a trace of a smile appeared on the young girl's face. She faintly felt proud. Putting away the piece of pork, she walked briskly back to the courtyard to wash the clothes that she hadn't finished washing. Halfway through the bath, she remembered that the son-in-law had instructed her to lock something in a cabinet and not let the second young miss see it. The young maidservant hurriedly got up and picked up a painting tube that was placed on the table by the door. Just as she was about to lock it in the cabinet, her footsteps suddenly paused. She peeked into the bedroom and found that Li was already asleep. When she looked at the thing in her hands again, a trace of doubt appeared on her small face. What is it that is so mysterious? Not letting second miss see, Xiaohuan secretly opened it to take a look. Son-in-law shouldn't know, right? Once again confirming that Li wouldn't suddenly wake up, the young girl pulled open the string on the outside of the painting tube like a thief. When the portrait of an extremely beautiful and unfamiliar girl appeared in front of her, the little servant girl's expression froze. For a moment she was stunned. After a long time, she stuck out her tongue and said in a small voice, "If 2 people love each other for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? The person son-in-law was talking about, could it be this girl?" Chapter 37. The maidservant named Xiao Huan would sometimes think about what kind of life the son-in-law led before he came up the mountain, who was in his family, whether he was married, whether he had a girl in his heart later. As they lived together for a long time, she gradually understood some things. Some of the information that Li Yi unintentionally revealed made the maidservant dispel some of her assumptions, but she was not so sure about most things. As early as the night of Chinese Valentine's Day, when Li Yi became very strange, the maidservant already had some guesses in her heart. If two people love each other for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? She had pestered Sister Qin, the only one in the village who had read books, to explain the meaning of these two sentences to her. She only remembered that Sister Qin had said at that time that son-in-law was probably a person with a story. She looked at the painting in her hand again, looking at the beautiful girl. The maidservant could not help but let her imagination run wild. Could it be that this was son-in-law's former sweetheart? One was a dignified scholar, the other was a charming beauty. They should have been a pair that would be envied by the world, helping each other in times of hardship and accompanying each other for a lifetime. But suddenly, there was a great change. The scholar was kidnapped by the mountain bandits and became the husband of the village's stronghold, while the beauty sat alone in her boudoir, washing her face with tears. Although it could not be seen normally, son-in-law's heart must have been very bitter, right? Thinking of this, an inexplicable feeling suddenly surged in the young girl's heart. She felt a lump in her throat and her heart tightened. Tears fell down her cheeks. "Xiao Huan, what's wrong?" A familiar voice suddenly sounded beside her. The young girl was startled. When she turned her head, she saw Lu Rui standing behind her. "Ah, second miss." She quickly reached out to wipe her tears and said, "Nothing. I accidentally squinted my eyes just now." "What is this?" Lu Rui looked at the seemingly familiar painting in her hand and looked over. A nap solved 1,000 worries. When Li Yi woke up the next day, it was almost lunchtime. Of course, he didn't have time to teach the naughty children, and no one paid him a salary. He didn't have enough motivation to work. Fortunately, it was up to him whether he went to school or not, and there were no restrictions. There was no one in the courtyard. Lu Rui should have gone out to practice. As for Lu Rui, Li hadn't seen her since yesterday. He was used to her occasional disappearances. Xiao Huan was cooking in the kitchen. It was not appropriate for a man to wander around the kitchen all the time. Moreover, after a long time, Li Yi himself would get tired of it. As early as half a month ago, he had begun to consciously teach Xiao Huan some things about cooking. In short, she could not just casually throw something into the pot and cook it like before. Eating should be a kind of enjoyment, not as simple as filling the stomach. After washing up, he walked to the door and stretched his body. Breathing in the fresh air from the mountains, he immediately felt refreshed. The air wasn't polluted by industrialization. Every breath he took was filled with the smell of nature. It was extremely fresh and had a strong smell of meat. After carefully distinguishing it, Li Yi was sure that he didn't smell wrong. It was indeed the smell of meat. The smell didn't come from his own kitchen. Last night, he had told Xiao Huan to handle the meat himself. He wrinkled his nose and sniffed. Looking in the direction of the smell, he saw the naughty child from Master Fang's family walking over with a huge bowl in his hands. The naughty child walked up to Li Yi, holding the bowl, and said timidly, "Young master, my father asked me to bring this over." Seeing the big bowl of cooked meat in the naughty child's hands, Li Yi smiled and patted his head. He took the bowl from his hands. Although he didn't lack it, it was a kind gesture, so he couldn't refuse it. After completing the task his father gave him, the naughty child didn't even say goodbye, "Young master," and ran home. Today, not only was there delicious rice, but there was also meat to eat. The naughty child's smile had already reached the corner of his mouth, and his heart had already flown home. Not only did Li Yi smell the strong smell of meat, but many people in the Willow Leaf village stood at the door and swallowed their saliva as they smelled the fragrance in the air. Looking at the situation in the village, even rice was a luxury. It had been a long time since the people in the village smelled the smell of meat. When they saw the naughty children strolling around the village with bowls of white rice, and a layer of meat on top of the rice. Everyone couldn't stay calm. Not to mention pork. Even the richest family in the village couldn't be so extravagant with white rice. A group of landless tenant farmers actually ate better food than the people of the Liu family, who had land. Many people couldn't help but stare at them, thinking of what happened yesterday. Some people finally realized that the things that Master Fong and his people brought back to the village were really food. A whole 10 stones of rice. For them, this was no less than an astronomical figure. Some people couldn't help but run to inquire about the news. When they came back, they were in a trance. They were worried that they didn't have a place to show off. When they were asked, Master Fong and his people naturally didn't hide anything and told them the whole story. When the news reached the ears of the people, it became a story of a powerful new son-in-law who easily exchanged a painting for 10 taels of silver. The meat and food were all bought by him. After hearing this piece of news, the crowd was left with nothing but deep shock. Among them, no one had seen what 10 taels of silver looked like. Previously, Fong's family was so poor that they didn't even have food to eat, but now they could eat rice and meat, which shocked them even more. At this time, the ones who regretted the most were the women who paid Li Yi to paint on the Chinese Valentine's Day. When they thought that the sky lamp they released was worth 10 taels of silver, their hearts were bleeding. Using 10 taels of silver to release the sky lamp was probably the most extravagant thing they had ever done in their lives. As for those who were originally from families similar to Master Fong and his people, they could only watch the people eat meat. They were filled with regret. They secretly regretted why they didn't stand on the side of Lu Rui and Lu Rui when everyone joined forces to attack the direct line of descent. Of course, there were also people who secretly thought that they should go down the mountain and kidnap a scholar. They wouldn't let him do anything and just lock him in his room to paint every day. But it was just a thought. If any scholar had this kind of ability to earn money, how could there be a poor scholar? No matter how jealous the direct line of descent and the others were, they had to admit, Lu Rui and Lu Rui had really picked up a treasure this time. Chapter 38. Li Yi did not know that he had become a treasure in some people's hearts. At this moment, he was taking inventory of the things he bought when he went down the mountain. Other than grain, meat, and some common vegetable seeds, he also bought a lot of seasonings that were used in cooking. He originally thought that the ancient people would be far inferior to the modern people in this aspect. But what Li Yi did not expect was that the seasonings of this era were actually more than what he had seen in the modern world. He was dazzled by the variety and simply bought a little of everything. After buying a lot of things, he spent more than half of the 10 taels of silver. There was still about 3 taels of silver left, but Li Yi did not spend it immediately. He kept some money for emergencies. When it was time to eat breakfast, Rui had not returned yet. When Li Yi asked Xiao Huan about it, the reply he received was that the young miss was often like this, and the servant girl was already used to it. As for Lu Rui, Li Yi did not have much to worry about. To be able to shatter a solid wooden table with one palm, she was indeed a hero among heroes. Under normal circumstances, she would not encounter any danger. It was just that disappearing without a sound was not a good habit. Li Yi shook his head and no longer thought about this matter. He took out the hawthorns he bought yesterday and walked into the kitchen. Xiao Huan was washing the dishes in the kitchen. When she saw Li Yi walk in, she poured the leftover frosting from the Qiao Qiao festival into the pot. After adding a little water, she used a small fire to slowly boil it. After instructing the servant girl to watch the fire and not burn the syrup, Li Yi cleaned the hawthorns and used a knife to carefully cut them in half. He took out the seeds and polished the bamboo skewers that he had prepared beforehand and placed them to one side. The servant girl sat in front of the stove, her large eyes occasionally glancing in his direction. Son-in-law looks like he is going to make something delicious again, the servant girl thought, and began to look forward to the delicious food she was about to eat. What Li Yi planned to make today was candied hawthorns. There were no candied hawthorns in this world, but in his original world, it was one of the most popular snacks for thousands of years. Although there were great changes in the types of candied hawthorns in modern times, whether it was the careful selection of the raw materials, the exquisite packaging, or the substitution of other fruits, the taste of candied hawthorns was constantly changing. However, there was a kind of sourness with a hint of sweetness and a lingering fragrance in the mouth that could never be replaced. When Li was young in his hometown in the countryside, what he most looked forward to seeing was the peddler, who carried a swollen wooden stick filled with candied hawthorns. He would spend a few cents to buy a stick of candied hawthorns and would lick it for half a day. Later, when he grew up, he did not eat it again. Now that he came to this world, he missed that familiar taste. When these memories that belonged to him appeared in this world, his heart would also receive some comfort. Not long after, when the sugar in the pot was almost cooked, Li skewered the hawthorns on the bamboo skewers and rolled them in the pot. The surface of the fruit was covered with a layer of crystal-clear sugar coating. After taking it out of the pot, the sugar quickly condensed, and the world's first stick of candied hawthorns was out of the pot. In less than a quarter of an hour, Li and Xiaohuan were squatting at the door, each holding 2 skewers of candied haws in their hands. They took a bite, and after a crisp sound, there was a sweet and sour taste in their mouths. This was the first time the servant girl ate candied hawthorns. She did not eat them in one bite like Li, but first stuck out her little tongue to lick the sugar coating. Even her heart was filled with sweetness, and her eyes curved into beautiful crescent moons. This scene was obviously very tempting. After a glance, Li did not dare to look anymore. A young girl's unintentional action could almost make people lose control. What would happen when she grew up? Facing the 3 beauties at home all day, she could still maintain her chastity. Li felt that even if Lu Xiaohui was reborn, he would not be able to do this. What is this? After finishing the 2 sticks of candied hawthorns in a few bites, a voice suddenly came from behind. Turning his head, he saw Lu Rui walking over with a stick of candied hawthorns in her hand. There was only half of the hawthorns left on the top. It was obvious that she had taken a bite. Oh, that is used to poison rats. There is arsenic in the icing. You must not eat it. Flicking away the remaining sugar residue at the corner of Lu Rui's mouth, Li said with a straight face. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Rui's expression changed and her pretty face immediately turned pale. Young master, one of the candied hawthorns is missing. At this moment, the young servant girl walked over with 2 sticks of candied hawthorns in her hand and said with some confusion. Lu Rui turned her head and saw the thing in Xiaohuan's hand. There was still a bit of sugar coating at the corner of her mouth. When she turned back to look at Li, her pretty face turned cold, and her hand was already on the hilt of the sword at her waist. Li raised his eyebrows. He was so used to teasing Xiaohuan that he did not realize that it was the witch Lu Rui just now. He stood up abruptly and strode out of the door. I remember now, we still have to go to school today. The young servant girl was stunned when she heard that. She said, Young master, have you forgotten? The school is closed today, you don't have to go. Ahem ahem. Little Huan, you remembered wrongly. Li coughed dryly as he quickened his pace. His casual joke had clearly frightened Lu Rui. If she were to fly into a rage out of humiliation, he would not be able to withstand it with his puny body. Bang! Li, who was rushing away from the scene, was caught off guard and bumped into someone. It was soft, and he smelled a familiar fragrance. Lu Rui raised her head and looked at him. She frowned and said, Husband, why are you in such a hurry? Li looked up and was about to speak when he suddenly saw blood seeping out of her sleeve, where he bumped into her just now. He could not help but be stunned. It was just a bump. Was it so serious? Then he realized something and hurriedly grabbed her hand and asked, Are you hurt? Miss, what happened to you? The young servant girl ran out of the courtyard and asked in panic. Lu Rui's figure followed closely behind. Seeing that she was standing there and was not seriously injured, she felt slightly relieved and asked, Are you okay? Lu Rui withdrew her hand without a trace and smiled faintly. She said, It's just a small injury. It's not a big deal. She reached out and handed a small bag of things to Xiaohuan. She said, There's some food here. Put it in the kitchen. You've lost so much blood. What's not a big deal? Li Yi frowned and threw the small bag of food to the side. He grabbed Lu Rui's hand again and strode into the house. Xiao Huan, go boil some water and bring the small box in my room over. Soon a voice came from the house. The young servant girl nodded and ran to the kitchen to boil water. Being dragged into the house by Li Yi, Lu Rui opened her mouth, but did not say anything in the end. Inside the house, Li Yi held Lu Rui's arm and untied the bandage she had casually wrapped around her wound. When he saw the wound that was more than 2 inches long and was still bleeding, he could not help but gasp. How did you get hurt? A cold light flashed in Lu Rui's beautiful eyes when she saw the wound. Chapter 39. At this moment, the most important thing was not how Lu Rui got injured, but how to treat the wound. In ancient times there were no antibiotics. If the wound got infected and the condition worsened, there was no way to treat it. One could only lie down and wait for death. Without any awareness of disinfection, the number of people who died from infected wounds every year was uncountable. She did not know where this cloth was found. Although it looked clean, it was definitely full of bacteria. The wound had never been disinfected. This was a matter of life and death. Was there a need to be so careless? Son-in-law, the water is ready. Not long after, a maidservant ran in with a clean copper basin. The conditions were too harsh, and there was no condition to use alcohol or iodophor to disinfect. He mixed some salt water according to the ratio, and asked the maid to throw a clean towel into the pot to boil. After dipping it in the salt water, he carefully cleaned Lu Rui's wound. The effect of salt water was not as good as alcohol, but it was better than nothing. Fortunately, the wound was not deep. Otherwise, the wound would have to be sutured before the medicine could be applied. There was no medical bandage, so he could only use gauze that had been boiled in boiling water as a substitute. The last time when Xiao Huan cut her hand, Li Yi prepared some, and it came in handy this time. From the beginning to the end, Lu Rui just watched quietly and did not say a word. As a martial artist, there were countless bumps and bruises in daily life. However, their physique was far better than ordinary people. Even if it was a knife wound, it could heal quickly. She did not take such a small injury to heart. But at this moment, Li Yi's serious look made her not say the words of rejection that she wanted to say. This was the first time in her life that she had seen such a method of treating wounds. Although she didn't know why he had to use salt water to clean the wound, and the gauze used to bandage the wound seemed to be particular, Lu Rui was very convinced of Li Yi's abilities. Moreover, this feeling of being taken care of was something that she had not experienced for a long time. Of course, if he did not tie a butterfly knot with the gauze at the end, everything would be even more perfect. As for Lu Rui taking apart the butterfly knot that she tied with great difficulty, and making an ugly knot, Li Yi had some complaints in his heart. What a beautiful bow. It was pleasing to the eye and looked a little cute. Xiao Huan was still the most obedient. After treating Lu Rui's wound, she went out to teach the little maid how to tie a butterfly knot. Sis, in the future, don't help the government catch those fugitives. After Li Yi and Xiao Huan left, Rui sat in front of the bed, holding Lu Rui's hand, and said after a long silence. Lu Rui smiled and said, I was careless this time and underestimated his strength. It won't happen again. Sister, you don't have to do these things anymore. Lu Rui seemed to have thought of something as a smile appeared on her pretty face. She said, Our family will no longer lack food in the future. Lu Rui didn't understand what she meant. He looked up at her in confusion. Do you still remember the immortal magpie bridge? Lu Rui's face showed a rare hint of teasing as she said, Sister, you have a good husband. As the young girl spoke in a low voice, Lu Rui's pretty face finally showed a surprised expression. The Qishi poetry champion. 10 taels of silver for a painting. In the room, the two of them whispered to each other like sisters. Li Yi tied a ribbon into a butterfly knot and tied it on the little maid's hair. The young girl lowered her head and fiddled with the corner of her clothes, her pretty face blushing. Reality proved that Li Yi's worries were completely unnecessary. The speed at which Lu Rui's wound healed far exceeded his expectations. This made him extremely suspicious in his heart. Could it be that her body structure was different from others? Such a long gash could heal without leaving a scar in half a month. Was she still a human? Of course. His relationship with Lu Rui hadn't reached the point where they could study each other's body structure. This kind of strange relationship between husband and wife was probably the only one in the stockade village. Sitting on a rock under the tree in front of the door, a group of naughty children whizzed past him. When they ran past him, they bowed and greeted him, "Mr." and then whizzed away. Teaching the naughty children was still a part of Li Yi's daily life. The naughty children now didn't just know how to write their own names. When he was bored, he taught them how to write Arabic numerals. After a few days, the naughty children's level was still at the level of addition and subtraction within 10. In the beginning, the naughty children were very slow to accept this new type of marking. However, ever since Li Yi took out a stick of candied hawthorn as a reward for the naughty child who memorized it the fastest, all the naughty children couldn't sit still anymore. The power of candied hawthorn began to show for the first time in this strange world. In just one morning, all the naughty children in the school had memorized how to write the Arabic numerals 1 to 10. It was completely different from the later generations, where they had to make up a mnemonic song like, 1 is thin and long like a pencil, 2 is like a duckling floating on water. For the naughty children, delicious food was the #1 productive force. Therefore, in the afternoon, all the naughty children in the school ate candied hawthorn. Of course, Li Yi's position in the hearts of the naughty children had risen to a new height. The naughty children didn't care about the grudges between their elders. They would remember whoever told them stories and gave them candies. Even the naughtiest naughty child in the stockade village would behave in front of Li Yi. This was something that all the naughty children's parents were envious of. Moreover, in the recent days, the image of Li Yi in the hearts of the direct descendants of the Lu clan had undergone an earth-shattering change. They could look down on the scholar who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. But if this scholar could casually draw a painting in exchange for 10 stone meters of rice, then everything would be different. Looking at the fact that someone who used to live at the same standard of living as them, or even worse than them, could eat rice for every meal, this kind of psychological gap was not something that could be erased in a short period of time. Moreover, it could be foreseen that this was only the beginning. It wouldn't be long before there would be an even greater gap in the stockade village. Those who wanted to seize the land and other resources that belonged to Lu Rui and her sister did so to improve their own lives. However, who would have thought that because of this reason, they would become enemies with the direct descendants of the Lu clan, which would instead cause them a greater loss. In a short period of time, more and more people began to weigh the gains and losses in their hearts. And a certain scholar, who caused this change, was currently waving a palm leaf fan, leisurely sitting under a tree in front of the door to enjoy the cool air. Although the weather at the beginning of August had already entered autumn, the weather at night was still hot and stuffy. Staying inside the house was even more irritating, so it was better to enjoy the wind under the tree outside. The only bad thing was that there were a lot of mosquitoes here. In just a short while, Li Yi's body had already been bitten several times. Just as he was wondering if there was any way to repel the mosquitoes, a sturdy figure walked over from the front. Chapter 40. It had been a long time since Li Yi came to Willow Leaf Village. At first, there was a little unpleasantness between him and the man surnamed Fong. Li Yi suffered a lot when he was caught and thrown on the back of a horse. However, as the two gradually became familiar with each other, the little unpleasantness also disappeared. Old Fong's temperament was very simple and honest. Although he was a little stupid, he was loyal to Lu Rui and her sister. Li liked such a simple and honest person. There were a dozen simple people like the man surnamed Fong in the village. If it were not for these people who had been helping them all these years, Lu Rui and her sister would have been eaten up by those covetous uncles. Whoever was good to his wife and sister-in-law, he would be good to them. This had always been Li Yi's way of doing things. That was why he could distribute the food to them without so much as a frown. During this period of time, he had truly treated them as his own people. The man surnamed Fong came over and sat on the stone next to Li. He seemed to be in a bad mood. Fong, what's wrong? You look sad. Did Dahe steal Zhuzi's steamed buns again? After getting familiar with him, Li also called the man surnamed Fong casually. Zhuzi was the son of the man surnamed Fong, and Dahe was their yellow native dog, a dog that always liked to steal the children's steamed buns. Li had seen countless times that Dahe had a steamed bun in its mouth, and the man surnamed Fong chased it all over the village with a broom in his hand. He swore that he would kill it and eat it with wine when he got back. As a result, the chase between a man and a dog would happen again every few days. It was reasonable to say that the man surnamed Fong should not be worried recently. Because of the food distributed last time, Fong's family temporarily moved from the bottom of the village to a well-off level and walked ahead of most people. At least for a short time, they did not have to worry about food and clothing. This was also what Li found strange. At this time, the burly man surnamed Fong obviously shouldn't be worrying. Could it be that he also encountered those special days of the month? Of course, it could not be ruled out that the couple's life was not harmonious last night, and he was despised by his mother-in-law in the morning. However, looking at Fong's energetic appearance, this possibility should not be high. Sigh. The man with the surname Fong sighed and turned to look at Li. He asked, "Young master, do you think I can only stay with my mother-in-law for the rest of my life?" When he said this, a strong unwillingness appeared on the face of the simple and honest man. At this moment, Li actually saw in his eyes an unyielding resistance to fate. He looked at Fong with some surprise. If he didn't misunderstand, was Fong talking about his life ideals with him? For a long time, Li had thought that Fong was just a salted fish without a dream. Like most people in the village, he had a home that could shelter him from the wind and rain, a wife and a child. He lived an ordinary life for a few decades, and his life passed just like that. Once a salted fish had a dream, he would no longer be a salted fish. He would become a salted fish with a dream. From Fong's eyes, Li could see his dissatisfaction with his current life. Obviously, Fong was different from the other guys who only had bodies but no brains. Could it be that you want to marry a few more concubines? Li looked at Fong and asked in surprise. Fong shivered when he heard this. He looked around and didn't find his mother-in-law's shadow. Only then did he feel relieved. He sighed and said, "Zhuzi is not young anymore. In a few years, I will arrange a marriage for him. But with the situation at home, we can't even afford a decent betrothal gift. We can't earn much money from herding horses, and it's not even enough to buy food. I'm thinking if I can find another way to make a living." "Young master, you are a capable person. Can you give me some ideas?" Li didn't expect that Fong was actually worried about this matter. Fong's child should be less than 10 years old this year, right? He was running around the village naked all day with snot coming out of his nose. How could Fong think about marrying a wife so quickly? Even though he knew that people in this era generally got married much earlier than in modern times, he really couldn't imagine what that silly naughty child would look like when he got married. However, no matter what era it was, there was one thing that didn't change much. The problem that Fong was facing now should be the same as the man's parents worrying about buying a house and a car before they got married thousands of years later. Li thought that Fong was tired of his mother-in-law all day long and wanted to find another concubine. He didn't expect that Fong was actually planning for his naughty child. Poor parents in the world. There was a heaven-defying cheating device in his mind. In this incomparably backward feudal era, Li actually had countless ways to earn money. Simple alcohol purification, making a few pieces of soap, a few bottles of perfume, or even selling paintings could make a fortune. The reason why he hadn't taken action yet was because he was too lazy. After experiencing life and death, the current Li felt that his previous life was really boring. Every day, he did things that he didn't want to do. Every day, he worked hard and conscientiously. It was too boring and too tiring. As a person who had lived 2 lives, he had to sit there every day and paint for people. What was the difference between him and his previous life? Life wasn't just about being born and living on. He didn't want to be rich and powerful, but he wanted to live a peaceful life. This was his current attitude towards life. Of course, before that, He had to accumulate enough wealth. Otherwise, he could only pursue a peaceful life while eating scraps and vegetables. It was a good thing that Fong had ideas and ideals. Recently, Li also had an idea in his mind. After being here for so long, it was time to do something for this world. High-density alcohol and soap could not be made in a hurry. Just buying the raw materials would cost a lot. Without dozens or hundreds of taels of silver, he could only think about it. The cost was small, and the returns were quick. Li thought about it for a while, and finally came up with a good idea. The candied haws that only appeared in the Willow Leaf Village should go out of the mountain and bring benefits to the naughty children in this world. The hawthorn fruit needed to make candied haws was called red fruit in this world. For people living in the mountain, it was a material with zero cost. There was a large hawthorn forest behind the mountain, and there were as many fresh hawthorn fruits as one wanted. The icing used to make the candied haws needed to be bought in the marketplace at the foot of the mountain, but the price was not too high. 2 taels of silver were enough to start the candied haws plan. For the time being, it would be the first step of his plan to make money in this world. Li Yi had absolute confidence in this kind of treasure, which had been passed down for thousands of years in the original world, and was still very attractive to naughty children. The reason why he hadn't brought it up was that he didn't want to work himself to death all day carrying a stick through the streets. When he turned around and saw old Fong's depressed face, Li Yi's face lit up like a spring breeze. Speaking of this idea, I do have one. Chapter 41. When Fong stood up and went home, his face was still a little confused. With his wood-like brain, he still couldn't figure out what was so good about those unripe and sour red fruits that he didn't like to eat. Why did the son-in-law want him to pick those things? As for the reason why he wanted him to chop the bamboo, old Fong couldn't figure it out. But soon, the confusion and bewilderment on his face disappeared. Thinking about the white rice and pork at home, all of old Fong's doubts were thrown out the window. The son-in-law was very capable. If he followed the son-in-law, he would have meat to eat. His words couldn't be wrong. In the following days, Fong's life began to become busy. Not only Fong, but also the naughty children of the Fong family were ruthlessly deprived of their time to play. They could no longer follow the naughty children in the stockade every day. They followed their father, went to the back mountain in the morning, and came back in the afternoon, often carrying a few bamboo sticks on their shoulders. Occasionally, people would see Fong go down the mountain before dawn every day and return to the stockade at night with a big bag of things on his back. He didn't even let go of the horse. No one knew what he was doing mysteriously. There was no impenetrable wall in the world. In the Willow Leaf Village, no one had any secrets to speak of. Soon, everyone knew that the thing Fong Laosan was playing with was called candied haws. It was a kind of hawthorn fruit that could be put together and sold outside. Hawthorn was not valuable to the people of the Willow Leaf Village. There was a large hawthorn forest in the back mountain, which was the public property of the stockade. However, even if the fruits were ripe every year, no one would pick them. They were sour, and the more they ate, the hungrier they got. If they ate too much, their teeth would fall out. Only those greedy naughty children would pick a few every year, when the fruits were ripe to satisfy their cravings. It wasn't that no one had considered selling the hawthorn at the foot of the mountain, but firstly, hawthorn was too common and cheap. Secondly, hawthorn ripened during the busy farming season. If they abandoned their work in the fields and walked these crooked paths instead, they would be ridiculed by everyone in the village. Fong was the object of everyone's ridicule. What was so good about hawthorn fruits? Only the ignorant children in the stockade village were interested in them. There was nothing good to eat or play in Qing, a prefectural city. It would be strange if anyone would spend money to buy these hawthorn fruits. Herding horses was a good job. Every month he could earn 100 copper coins. It was enough for him to buy a few caddies of rice. Why didn't he have to resort to such dishonest means? However, they soon realized that Fong Laosan's family did not lack those few caddies of rice. But this did not affect the mockery they felt towards Fong. When everyone didn't have any lofty ideals or ambitions, and just wanted to be a salted fish for the rest of their lives, Fong, a salted fish with dreams, would easily attract the attention of others. We're all salted fish. It's good enough for us to face the yellow soil and face the sky for the rest of our lives. What right do you have to dream? As a result, Fong, the salted fish that wanted to be reborn, quickly became the topic of conversation among the people in the village. Did you guys hear? Fong Lausen seems to be selling some candied haws. Dishonest means. Doesn't he know if he's cut out for it? Sigh, of course Fong Lausen wouldn't have thought of this idea. I heard that it was Rui's husband who came up with it. Hehe, what does that scholar know? I heard that he invested a lot of money this time. I'll wait and see how he ends up. Arguments like this were not uncommon in the middle level of Willow Leaf Village. Even Li had heard of it. However, he just listened to these gossips and laughed it off. There were many people in the village who wanted to see him make a fool of himself. Sometimes he would sigh in his heart. Lu Rui and her sister seemed to have enemies everywhere in the village. Xiao Huan, on the other hand, was very indignant about some of the words she accidentally heard. Li had seen her pouting and nagging when she came back from outside several times. What do you know? The candied haws made by the son-in-law are very delicious. He will definitely make a lot of money. Then you guys will die of anger. The little maid had been with Lu's sister Rui since she was a child. Naturally, she had been treated coldly by other people of the Lu family. In order not to cause trouble for Miss Rui, she had been wronged outside, and could only endure it when she came back. This situation changed a lot after Li came. Now they didn't have to worry about their livelihood all day long. They could walk with their heads held high outside. The son-in-law was a really powerful person. No one in the village could compare with him. What right did they have to laugh at the son-in-law? What Li didn't expect was that those rumors had no effect on him. But Fong couldn't help it. Son-in-law, will there really be people willing to buy this candied haws? Until now, Fong still had doubts about the feasibility of this matter. After all, it was just an ordinary hawthorn. Even if it was covered with sugar, it was still a hawthorn. The son-in-law had given him all the money. If all the money went to waste in the end, even if the son-in-law didn't blame him, he would feel bad. Seeing that Fong was looking at him with a perturbed expression, Li glanced at him and said, "If you don't feel at ease, why don't I find someone else to do it?" Old Wu came to find me this morning and said that he wants to try too. Why don't you rest and let him do it? Looking at the expression on Li Yi's face, Fong felt at ease. The next moment, Fong's face immediately changed into his signature honest smile. He put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder and said, there's no need. Old Wu has a one-track mind. He's not the type to do this. Besides, what kind of relationship do I have with the son-in-law? Don't forget that I was the one who captured the son-in-law. Seeing the burly man with the surname Fong walk out with a smile, several black lines appeared on Li Yi's face. It was very easy to make candied hawthorns, and didn't require much preparation time. Fong had already bought the icing from the foot of the mountain. The August hawthorns were not fully ripe yet, but it didn't affect the taste much. Under Li Yi's guidance, Fong cut all the bamboo from the mountain into bamboo sticks of similar size. The edges were polished smooth, and the bottom of the bamboo stick was slightly wider, making it more suitable to hold. After the hawthorns were seeded and coated in the syrup, he dipped a little sesame seed on the top. There was a little white in the middle, making it look even more attractive. He stuck all of the candied hawthorns on wooden sticks and brooms. Seeing the naughty child beside him gulping down his saliva, Fong felt a little more confident. He took down a candied hawthorn and handed it to him. He conveniently kicked the naughty child's butt and said, "Listen to your mother at home. Wait for me to come back tonight." 2 hours later, on the crowded main street of Qing'an Prefecture, the simple and honest man carried a strange object and stood by the side of the road. He hesitated for a long time before a resolute expression appeared on his face. A moment later, a voice full of energy traveled over. "Ice candied gourd." For a moment, several gazes were cast over from the crowd on the street. Chapter 42. Candied haws. What is that? I don't know, I've never heard of it before. Let's go and take a look, the term candied haws, was undoubtedly a new term to the people of this world. With a curious mentality, the pedestrians on the street all looked in the direction of the voice. They saw a burly man standing in a corner of the street, holding a long object in his hand. The top of the object was densely packed with something. Looking closely, those things that were the size of abacus beads were strung together. Weren't they just ordinary red fruits? Even if the red fruit was covered with a layer of crystal clear stuff and sprinkled with sesame seeds, it couldn't change the fact that it was a red fruit. "Hey man, how much are you selling this ice?" "Ice something gourd." A young man in a long robe came forward and asked. 5 copper coins for a skewer." The simple and honest man immediately replied. 5 copper coins? The young man was stunned at first, then he shook his head and left. Red fruits were not rare. One could buy a few caddies of them on the street for 1 copper coin. Only a fool would spend 5 copper coins for just a few of them. "I thought it was some rare item, but it's just a few red fruits." 5 copper coins for a skewer. This man really dares to ask for a price. "TSK, there's nothing to see, let's go." When he saw the crowd that had been attracted by his first call quickly disappear, the heart of the man surnamed Fong could not help but sink. The thing that he was most worried about had happened. "Here's 5 copper coins, give me a skewer." A voice came from the side. The man surnamed Fong turned his head and saw a middle-aged scholar in navy blue robes. He took out 5 copper coins from his chest pocket and placed them in his hand. This was his first customer. The burly man was overjoyed and hurriedly put the money away. He took a skewer of candied haws and handed it over. "Your candied haws." The scholar reached out and took it, then left. The burly man, who wanted to get his evaluation, felt a little disappointed. After all, he didn't want everything he had done for the past few days to be in vain. In a place where the burly man surnamed Fong couldn't see, the middle-aged scholar took a bite of the sugar-coated haws, and a trace of surprise flashed across his face. He lowered his head to look at the sugar-coated haws in his hand and murmured, "There's sweetness in the sour, crispy and delicious. I really didn't expect that red fruits could be made in such a novel way." Because he was a little hungry, he bought a snack that he had never seen before on a whim, but it gave him a different kind of surprise. A smile appeared on the middle-aged scholar's face, and his mood seemed to improve a little. He continued to walk forward. At this moment, the burly man surnamed Fong, who had just completed his first transaction, had a glimmer of hope in his heart. He raised his head and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Candied haws! Delicious candied haws! Candied haws! It's free if it's not sweet." After an hour, the man with the surname Fong, whose voice had become somewhat hoarse from all the shouting, leaned against the wall in an extremely discouraged manner. The trace of hope in his heart had also been mercilessly destroyed. Up until now, his second skewer of candied haws had not been sold. It had to be said that the shape of the candied haws was very peculiar, and it attracted many people to inquire about it. However, when they saw that the so-called candied haws were just a few red fruits strung together, and the price was actually 5 copper coins, they all lost interest. "Should I try selling it for 1 copper coin a skewer first?" Fong muttered to himself somewhat helplessly. However, when he remembered that the son-in-law had warned him before he left that a skewer of candied haws could not be less than 5 copper coins, he could only give up on this idea. On the street, a little further away from the burly man surnamed Fong, a mischievous child of about 5 or 6 years old was hugging a woman's thigh and wailing incessantly, "Be good, mother will make delicious food for you when we get back," the woman helplessly said as she looked at her child, who was suddenly making a scene. No matter how hard she tried to coax him, she could not calm him down. "No, I want to eat it now." The mischievous child was obviously not that easy to fool. He hugged her thigh and shook his head vigorously. The mischievous child, who had long since figured out his mother's routine, knew that what awaited him when he returned home was definitely not delicious food, but a vicious beating as punishment for his disobedience. Rather than foolishly waiting to be beaten when he returned home, he might as well pester his mother for some benefits. This way, it would be worth it even if he was beaten when he returned home. The mischievous child, who was making a scene on the street, quickly attracted the attention of passers-by. The woman also felt a little embarrassed when she was stared at by so many people. She wanted to calm the child down first, and then slowly educate him when they returned home. However, she suddenly realized that the crying beside her had stopped. She looked down and discovered that the mischievous child was staring straight ahead. He swallowed his saliva, pointed in the direction of the corner of the street, and said, "Mother, I want that." After a moment, the mischievous child, who had tasted his desire, left while licking the candied haws in satisfaction. He was extremely fond of this delicacy that he had never tasted before. After finishing all of the hawthorns, he licked the sugar off the bamboo stick, but he was reluctant to throw it away. He carefully put it away, and even licked the residue from the corner of his mouth. He was filled with joy, thinking that he would definitely tell a few of his close friends when he returned home. He did not notice that the woman beside him had a rather unpleasant expression on her face. The first thing he would be greeted with when he returned home was a vicious beating. After 2 whole hours, he had only sold 2 candied haws. Fong's heart was already in complete despair. This time, I'm afraid the young master is going to be disappointed. After letting out a long sigh, the man with the surname Fong picked up the stick with the candied haws and prepared to return home. He had only taken a few steps when he suddenly heard a flurry of footsteps behind him. In the next moment, he discovered that he had been surrounded. The people surrounding Fong were a group of mischievous children. The oldest among them was only 10 years old, and they all looked at Fong with excited gazes, the candied haws in his hands. The mischievous child standing at the very front was about 5 or 6 years old. Fong had just met him. He was the one who had taken care of his second business. The mischievous child covered his butt with one hand, and the tears on his face had yet to dry. He pointed at the skewers of candied haws and said, "This is the one. Whether I lied to you or not, you'll know soon enough." After saying that, the mischievous child stretched out his small hand and revealed the 5 copper coins in his palm. He said loudly, "Uncle, I want a skewer of candied haws." "Me too. Me too. I want 2 skewers." The mischievous children chattered one after another. Fong looked at the fair and clean little hands that were stretched out, and his expression was a little dazed. On the street, a girl passing by was puzzled as she watched a group of excited naughty kids rushing past her. Each of them was holding a skewer of food and eating deliciously. When she looked ahead, she saw a burly man carrying a strange stick. The strength of the mischievous children could not be underestimated. A small portion of the candied haws disappeared in an instant, and was replaced by a large pile of copper coins in his pocket. "Excuse me, how much is this?" Just as Fong was standing there in a daze, a pleasant voice came from the side. Seeing the incomparably delicate young girl standing next to him, the man with the surname Fong couldn't help but blush. He said, five copper coins. "All right, give me one." The young girl nodded and said with a smile. She took a small bite, and her mouth was instantly filled with a sweet and sour taste. The young girl's beautiful eyes slightly brightened. She took out a small piece of silver from her beautiful pouch and pointed at the remaining candied haws. "I want all of these." Chapter 43. Fong had brought around 30 skewers of candied haws with him today. Half of them had been bought by the naughty children, and there were still around a dozen left. It was obvious that the young girl couldn't carry them all by herself. After the young girl paid, Fong took the initiative to help her deliver them to the place. With so many copper coins in his pocket, it felt heavy and made him feel very at ease. At this moment, Fong couldn't help but feel ashamed for doubting his son-in-law's thoughts. "Uncle, how are these candied haws made?" The young girl walked in front with a skewer of candied haws in her hand. She gently licked the sugar coating and guessed that it was frosting, but she wasn't sure. She turned her head and asked in confusion, "Miss, I can't tell you that." Fong laughed foolishly. He didn't reveal the method of making the candied haws, just because the young girl was beautiful. Fong wasn't that stupid. This was something he would use to make his family rich in the future. How could he just casually tell others? Hearing Fong's answer, the young girl was stunned for a moment. After a while, she also realized that her question was a bit inappropriate. She smiled apologetically and said, "Sorry, I forgot that this is Uncle's secret recipe. I shouldn't have asked." Fong laughed foolishly and didn't reply. He followed behind the young girl and walked through the noisy street. He didn't know when it started, but the crowd started to thin out. The buildings on both sides also gradually became more luxurious. There was a row of red doors with mighty stone lions in front of them. It was extremely extravagant. To buy a stronghold here, it would probably cost a lot of money. Fong muttered to himself. He also began to wonder about the identity of the young girl. After all, the people who could live here were either rich or noble. They weren't people ordinary people like them could come into contact with. "It's here." Not long after, the young girl stopped walking. She turned around and smiled at the man surnamed Fong. "Wait here for a moment. I'll go in and come out immediately." Fong nodded and watched the young girl walk through the 10 feet tall door. The two servants at the door bent over and said something. Because he was too far away, he couldn't hear clearly. Not long after, the young girl's figure appeared again. 4 young girls followed behind her, each holding a tray in their hands. They walked to the front of the burly man surnamed Fong and looked at the strings of crystal-clear candied haws. The young girl on the left asked curiously, "Sister Yenji, what is this?" "Don't ask too much. I'll tell you later. First pluck these candied haws." The girls looked at Fong with puzzled eyes, then looked at the candied haws one by one. He couldn't throw away the stick he was carrying on his shoulder. By the time these girls took all the candied haws off the tree, Fong's mission had been completed. Before he left, he heard one of the girls muttering, "Isn't this just a red fruit? What's so rare about it?" As for what happened after that, Fong was not in the mood to listen. He just wanted to go back to the stockade village and start making the next batch of candied haws. At this time, in the backyard of an extremely luxurious mansion in Anqing Prefecture City. Who would have thought that a mere red fruit could be made so delicious? A young girl licked her lips, as if she hadn't had enough. Her action was extremely seductive. "You actually doubted me just now." The young girl named Yenji glanced at her and said, "Hee, it's all my fault." "Thank you, Sister Yenji." The young girl shook her arm in a fawning manner and said with a smile, "It's strange. These are just ordinary red fruits. How can there be such a big difference in the taste?" A young girl said doubtfully, "It should be because of the layer of icing on the outside. This candied haws shouldn't be difficult to make. We can try it in the future." The young girl named Yenji thought for a moment and said, although she didn't ask for the method of making it, it wasn't hard to guess. After all, other than the red fruit, there was only a layer of sweetness on the outside of the candied haws. It seemed like the icing had melted and then wrapped around it. "Yenji, what are you doing here?" A gentle voice suddenly came from behind them. The young girls turned their heads and saw a beautiful woman walking over with the support of 2 servant girls. The woman had a beautiful face. Although the crow's feet at the corner of her eyes betrayed her age, her charm didn't diminish. It was just that her face was a little haggard and thin. Her face was also abnormally pale. "Princess!" Seeing this woman, the young girls stood up in a panic. They were also a little nervous. They were the servants of the prince's mansion. If they were to gather here, it would be easy to think that they were slacking off. "Princess, why did you come out? The wind is strong outside. You should go back quickly." The young girl named Yenji had a worried expression on her face. She hurriedly walked over and supported the woman as she spoke. The beautiful woman shook her head and said, "It's fine. It's so stuffy to stay in the room. It's good to come out for a walk." After speaking, her eyes inadvertently glanced behind the young girls. On the stone table, there was a string of red and crystal clear things. She walked over and asked curiously, "What is this?" The young girl closest to her quickly wiped the corner of her mouth and said respectfully, "Princess, this is called candied haws." "Candied haws?" The woman asked again. "What is this thing used for?" "Princess, this is a snack that Yenji bought on the street." The young girl named Yenji came forward and said. The woman nodded and picked up a stick of candied haws. After looking at it, she said, "It's crystal clear and looks good." She then took a bite. The sweet and sour taste made her mouth water. She then said, "It's delicious." Seeing the woman finish the stick of candied haws, all the young girls couldn't help but widen their eyes. Especially the young girl named Yenji. A look of surprise appeared on her pretty face. As the personal maid of the princess, she certainly knew that the princess had been feeling unwell these days. She could hardly eat anything. Occasionally, she would eat something, but she would quickly spit it out. As a result, she had lost a lot of weight. Many doctors had been invited, but they were all useless. Even the specially invited imperial doctors were helpless. After so many days, this was the first time she had seen the princess eat so happily. Why do I feel even hungrier after eating all this? After eating the candied haws in her hand, the woman had a look of confusion on her face. She said, "Yenji, tell the kitchen to make some food and send it to the room later." "Yes, princess, I'll go right away." The young girl's face was even more surprised. After responding, she immediately trotted away. A moment later, in the study of the manor, the middle-aged man who was reading in the room suddenly stood up when he heard the servant's report. With a face full of joy he said, "What did you say? Princess can eat now?" The young girl nodded and said, "Yes, the princess took the initiative to ask the kitchen to make food. Sister Yenji said that the princess ate a lot tonight. Quick, take me to see the princess." The middle-aged man laughed and strode out of the room after his beloved wife's stubborn illness was cured. At the same time, Fong also strode into Li Yi's house. Clatter! Piling up a large pile of copper coins on the table in front of him, Fong laughed and said, "Young master, all the candied haws have been sold." Previously, he only earned 100 copper coins a month. Today, in just a short time, it was equivalent to his monthly income. Fong was extremely happy. Now we don't have to worry about whether Zhuzi can get a wife or not, do we? This result was within Li Yi's expectation, so he said with a smile. Lao Fong laughed heartily and said with lofty sentiments, "Don't worry. If we make money in the future, we can also learn from those rich people and live in big houses, marry a few concubines, and live a comfortable life." The big houses that he saw today had obviously completely stimulated Fong, and even his life goals had been raised a lot. It seemed that he was shocked by Fong's lofty ideals. Li Yi's smile froze on his face. After a while he sighed, stood up, patted Fong on the shoulder, and turned away without saying a word. "Young master, what's wrong?" Li Yi's actions puzzled the man with the surname Fong. Just as he was about to ask, he seemed to have sensed something. He turned his head abruptly and saw a familiar face appear behind him. However, at this time, this familiar face was extremely gloomy. Who else could it be but his wife? "Fool, what did you just say?" In just a moment, the broom in Li Yi's house was in Madame Fong's hand. What a sin! Li Yi stood in the courtyard and heard the screams coming from the room. He sighed deeply. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.